truth is,
ever interfere with my business again. Because if you do...
She recast Pietro?
Only we can remake the universe. Only we can take the bridle of the cosmos and lead it to where it needs to go.
No more false faces. You said you wanted the Mandarin. You're looking right at him.
My back, it's kind of stiff from all the swinging, I guess.
Oh yeah, no, I got a middle back thing too.
Really?
Yeah.
We'd have no memory of you.
Although Loki is a trickster that we all expect to return eventually, when he came back as a woman, many fans were shocked at his new form. Though mythologically speaking, Loki is known as an accomplished shapeshifter, and even in Marvel some of this is carried over. Still, the question remained of why this form? While Loki gave his own excuses, it was later revealed that he'd hijacked Sif's body to achieve his Lady Loki form, and would be forced later on to relinquish it. He would also die and return as Kid Loki, who had no knowledge of the villain his older self had been. And now, shockingly enough, but not if you're a fan of Norse mythos as I said, we have a version of Loki that can easily change between all of his forms at will. Pretty cool. Maybe not one of the most shocking moments per se, but definitely gave us a shocking panel. If you are wondering where one of the images on our thumb came from, that would be from Savage Wolverine number 5. Hulk and Wolverine have come to blows multiple times in the comics, but this was one of their most brutal fights, though not as brutal as their battle in Old Man Logan, in my opinion. During this story, Wolverine was attracted to Savage Land due to a device calling out to others to create chaos, so that an ancient monster from beneath the island could be released. Kind of a Cthulhu-looking space thing? Wolverine managed to get his wits about him, but was met there shortly after by an out-of-sorts Hulk. Wolverine figured the best way to take out Hulk was by pouncing on him and sending his adamantium claws clean through his brain. Alas, this didn't help that much, and the monster still escaped its prison, soaring off-world to meet more alien monsters out in space. Oh dear. Number 8. Hulk becomes immortal. We talked about Hulk's death by Hawkeye's arrow on part 1 of this list, but what we didn't talk about is how even after that shocking death, he just kept coming back. So many times in fact that it gave writer Al Ewing an idea. What if Hulk actually couldn't die? This concept allowed him to write a story which brought us back to the dark origins of Hulk, a man who would originally turn into a monster when the sun set. This was the original transformation story for Hulk, not based on emotions turning him into some sort of psychological horror, but based on old monster stories like that of Frankenstein, werewolves, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. When we got the immortal Hulk, this was how we were introduced to the big green hero slash monster, as an immortal being that when the sun sets, even when Banner had been killed, would rise again. Even though this concept was the original concept for the character, it was one we'd become so removed from that it shocked readers in a delightful way, reinventing the character they'd come to love by taking us back to his roots.
Number 7. Barry Allen's death. First of all, I just want to get it out there that the Crisis on Infinite Earths event is absolutely insane, and if you're not familiar with it, you should 1000% give it all a read. Put simply, it was an attempt to reboot the entire DC universe because everything had become a bit too confusing, and obviously DC's way of doing that was to just get rid of the multiverse and many of its characters, one of which being Barry Allen. Near the end of the event, Barry made the ultimate sacrifice by literally running himself to death in order to save countless lives. What he did is, in order to put a stop to the Anti-Monitor's plan to destroy the world with his antimatter cannon, Barry ran so fast that he created a speed vortex that would absorb the power of the cannon, but he ended up dying in the process. For years, the character remained dead, leaving the mantle to Wally West, the original Kid Flash, to serve as the Scarlet Speedster in his stead. Eventually, this story was retconned and it was revealed that Barry didn't actually die. But back in the day, this supposed death really hit home, and that's why it deserves a spot on this list today. Check it out for yourself in 1985's Crisis on Infinite Earths, number 8. Number 6. Supergirl's death. Now remember how I just said Crisis on Infinite Earths was an absolutely insane storyline and killed a ton of heroes? Well, sadly among those ranks was also Supergirl, losing her life one issue before Barry loses his. Now like I said before, the storyline was all about simplifying the DC universe and having it go back to its roots. And since there was originally only one Kryptonian on Earth, that meant Kara had to go. I'm glad to say though that the character was at least able to go out like a hero as she battled it out with the Anti-Monitor, who kept hitting her with lethal doses of his energy. She kept on fighting though until a lethal blow sadly took her out. Like the true hero she is, she sacrificed her life for her cousin Superman and died in his arms. Later we see Superman leave his Fortress of Solitude with the body of Supergirl wrapped in her indestructible cape, and he sets her free in space, promising to remember and miss her forever. Although this death was not as impactful as Barry's, I would argue that Supergirl's was much more shocking, as it was much more immediate than Barry's. Readers actually got to spend a few moments with Barry despite actually knowing that he was gonna die, while Kara's kinda just came straight out of left field. Check it out for yourself in 1985's Crisis on Infinite Earths, number 7. Number 5. Ted Kord's death. In the pages of Countdown to Infinite Crisis, the second Blue Beetle, Ted Kord, is left near bankruptcy after funds from his company were mysteriously stolen. His investigation into his missing fortune leads him to something much darker though. A conspiracy to wipe out the superhuman community orchestrated by the Justice League International's former manager, Maxwell Lord. Lord had definitely enjoyed his influence over the Justice League and the formation of Justice League International in the wake of Crisis on Infinite Earths. I mean, he was a wealthy and powerful businessman who claimed to have learned nobility and compassion from his late father, Maxwell Lord III. All of this pointed to him as a very genuine figure out to keep Earth safe, but I guess we were wrong because during the Invasion saga, Lord acquires the superpower of mind control, and things only got worse from there. The build up to Infinite Crisis saw many shocking events occur in the DC universe, including Lord's brutal murder of Ted Kord. Lord's betrayal didn't even end there, as he continued to damage the League throughout the Infinite Crisis. Thankfully, Wonder Woman straight up just murders him after he mind controls Superman into assaulting his fellow Leaguers, snapping his neck, which was also super shocking, so I guess this point is kind of a twofer. Check out this death in 2005's Countdown to Infinite Crisis, number 1. Number 4. Superman's death. Wonder Woman Dead Earth. This Wonder Woman storyline follows Wonder Woman being accidentally awakened by a group of survivors from a centuries-long sleep at the Batcave. Diana discovers the Earth has been reduced to a nuclear wasteland and is infected by mutated insectoid creatures. Now what does this have to do with Superman, you ask? Well, in issue 3 of this miniseries, Diana and Cheetah head to the Fortress of Solitude to see if Superman is still alive and well and can help them protect the people of Earth. Upon entering the fortress, they are greeted by robot Superman, and Diana gets quite the shock to say the least when she sees Superman dead on his throne. And it only gets worse from there because it turns out she was the one who killed him. Flashback all those years ago to that huge war, and we see the US release a full armada of missiles against all of the Amazonians. Clark knew they were going to be targeting Smallville as well, so he went to go protect his family, which left Wonder Woman to defend Paradise Island alone. Now there were far too many missiles and her home wound up being destroyed. She completely lost it and started pummeling Superman, ending his life with a punch straight through his chest. Now the way that this was drawn is absolutely beautiful, so check it out for yourself in 2020's Wonder Woman Dead Earth, number 3. Number 3. Alex DeWitt. For so many heroes, one of their biggest fears is that their secret identity will get out and put their loved ones at risk, so generally they do anything and everything that they can in order to prevent that from happening. In Kyle Rayner's case, he learned the hard way what happens if you're not careful enough. After taking over the Green Lantern mantle from Hal Jordan and receiving his power ring, Rayner seeks out his girlfriend Alexandra, or Alex DeWitt. DeWitt wasn't sure what to make of the new power Rayner had acquired, but eventually she decided to help Rayner control and understand the potential power he had command over. Probably not the best idea because he came home one day and found out that she had been killed by the supervillain Major Force and had been stuffed into a refrigerator. Kyle, obviously upset and motivated by anger and regret, sought out Major Force. Kyle almost killed Major Force before his ring runs out of power. Major Force then takes over the fight until his green rocks that powers the power rings turns into a lantern battery and charges Rayner's ring back up. Rayner finally subdues Major Force, but when he begins to interrogate Major Force over why he was there and why he killed DeWitt, the police arrived and tried to take Rayner away. Now Rayner obviously flees and runs into Alan Scott, who tries to console him over his loss. DC writer Gail Simone, now a legend in her own right, was absolutely horrified that the company consented to kill a female character and in such a gruesome way, merely to motivate the male protagonist. That's when she coined the term women in refrigerators for any time women in comics were killed, seriously injured, sexually violated, or depowered merely to motivate male heroes. And she published a long list of such cases, so go check it out for yourself. Now check out her death for yourself in 1994's Green Lantern Volume 3, number 55. Number 2. Jason Todd's death. The death of Jason Todd was so surprising that it not only shocked readers, it shocked DC themselves. Now the character had a pretty weird history as he was introduced as a new teenage Robin after Dick Grayson grew up and became Nightwing, but fans weren't really too keen on him. In 1988, DC Comics writer Denny O'Neil pitched the idea to make the readers vote via 1/900 numbers on how a story should end, and O'Neil knew that the vote couldn't be on something tiny or small, so he decided that the vote would be about the fate of Jason Todd. Knowing that Todd was relatively unpopular, it seemed like the right thing to do to help settle what needed to be done with the character. Setting up a 36-hour voting period, readers got one of two numbers to call from the back of Batman number 427. The ending of that issue showed us the Joker beating Todd with a crowbar, leaving him in a warehouse that was set to explode. Then issue number 428 came out and the final vote was 5,343 for killing Jason Todd and 5,271 against killing him, meaning that his fate was kinda sealed. Jason Todd was dead, and the iconic image of Batman carrying Todd's dead body that followed was one that is still recognizable to pretty much everyone today. Now, years after the event, O'Neil revealed that there was someone who programmed their phone to call every 90 seconds for 8 hours. That person chose the same option every time, for Jason Todd to die. Totaling around 320 votes from that one person alone, O'Neil has gone on record saying that that one person is the entire reason that Jason Todd died. So I guess they're also the reason that we have the Red Hood, so thank you? I don't know. If you're not familiar with this storyline, aka a death in the family, check it out for yourself starting with 1988's Batman Volume 1, number 426, all the way to 429. Number 1, Death of Superman. Now of course, we have to talk about this one, we can't not. In 1992, the writers of the Superman titles had enough of the Man of Steel and decided to just straight up kill him. Okay, not really. In response to not being able to do their original story, which was to have Lois Lane and Clark Kent get married, due to all the conflicts with the then upcoming Lois and Clark The New Adventures of Superman, the writers were racking their brain trying to figure out what to do, and they ultimately landed on this storyline. The way they pulled this off was they introduced a new character, an almost unthinkable monster whose only purpose was to destroy things. Known as Doomsday, this monster caused some serious destruction towards Metropolis. Jump forward a little bit to 1993 and we see Superman take on this unstoppable bad guy. Obviously Superman was able to take him down because, you know, he's Superman, but both Doomsday and Superman ended up succumbing to their injuries at the end of the fight. Now while some superheroes have been resurrected multiple times, this was the very first time that Clark Kent had bit the dust, and it sent shockwaves through the entire world of DC Comics. The aftermath of the story followed how the world reacted and who showed up to take its place, the latter part featuring the introduction of several new characters who stuck around to help later form the DCU. Death of Superman is one of the most far-reaching media events in comics history, and to this day it still stands as such, and that coupled with the return of Superman changed the rules for DC, opening the door for anyone to come back to life. So check out the storyline for yourself so you can see firsthand exactly what this death meant to the DC universe, starting with 1992 Superman, The Man of Steel Volume 1, number 18.
Number 10, MJ is killed! Peter gets a hook hand. One of the most shocking series around is JJ and his son Henry Abrams' Spider-Man miniseries from 2019. Well, it started in 2019. It is only 5 issues long, but has been delayed longer than I even thought possible for a series like this. Number 4 is finally set to come out September 23rd, and 5 has been pushed from its original release of January 2020 to November of 2020. Yikes, that's a huge delay. This series starts off with a bang and is filled with tons of interesting shocks. Mary Jane dies pretty much right off the bat, killed by the villain we later come to know as Cadaverous, and causing Peter Parker to retire and abandon their son Ben, leaving him in Aunt May's care. Which is pretty crazy because Aunt May was already pretty old when Spider-Man started, so yeah. And when Peter Parker does return, he's got a moody look, a beard, and a hook hand. That is some kind of something. Peter with a hook for a hand in a world where we have super advanced prosthetics and where he's friends with genius level heroes like Tony Stark and Reed Richards, and you know, is a genius himself. And I thought I'd seen everything. Number 9, Mutant Massacre. This shocking crossover event actually was so startling and well received that it effectively worked to help boost comic sales for the series involved. It follows the story of the mysterious villainous group of mutants known as the Marauders, who we'd later learn were working for the evil Mr. Sinister, as they attempt to murder the entire mutant community known as the Morlocks, many of whom have grotesque physical mutations which cause them to be rejected by society Society, a group whom Futurama likely took its inspiration from when it comes to their own sewer mutants. The Marauders succeed in their mission, killing hundreds of Morlocks during this gloomy attack, which would later be referred to as the Mutant Massacre. This story also featured a particularly shocking moment when the X-Factor come face to face with the Marauders, who crucify the mutant Angel. Yikes. Number 8. Lizard eats his own son. A reformed Dr. Curt Connors would find himself becoming the Lizard once more. In the story Shed, the Lizard finally managed to kill Connors' consciousness, taking on a new mantle, Shed, and causing Connors to no longer be able to fight back against those animal instincts. Now, how did he do this? Well, by eating Kurt's son, Billy. That's right, Curt Connors as the Lizard basically ate his own son in a comic. Spider-Man at the time had been racing towards the Doctor in an attempt to stop him, but arrived too late. Fortunately, Spider-Man at least was able to reclaim some of Connors' humanity by showing him pictures of his son and forcing him to remember and face what he had done.
Number 7. The Killing Joke. Now, I feel like I've already mentioned this before, but I am gonna mention it again. This is probably my favorite Batman storyline ever. The story involved the Joker breaking loose from Arkham Asylum, kidnapping Commissioner Gordon, and attempting to drive the man mad, all to prove that it only takes one terrible day to drive anyone crazy, which is actually a theme that was revisited in the Dark Knight movie, in which the Joker believes anyone will do terrible things if the circumstances are bleak enough. Along the way, Joker attacked Barbara Gordon in a way that still has people talking decades later. Joker shot her through the spine and paralyzed her. Later, while trying to drive Commissioner Gordon crazy, Joker showed him pictures he took of Barbara that showed Joker took off her clothes and insinuated some pretty bad things. Although regarded today as a classic Batman/Joker story, The Killing Joke has also received some deserved criticism for the way that it had the Joker paralyze Barbara Gordon, making her another victim in the woman in the refrigerator trope, which I will talk about just a little bit later. Barbara did later become a hero to many paraplegics when she became the cyber crime fighter known as Oracle, but the circumstances of her paralysis are still considered some of the most exploitative moments in comic book history to today. If you think you can stomach it, check out this one shot for yourself in 1988's Batman: The Killing Joke. Number 6. Identity Crisis. Now, at its core, Identity Crisis is a love story wrapped inside a murder mystery with a concerted effort to bring real-world crime and quote-unquote darkness to the Justice League's Ivory Watchtower. It all starts with the death of Sue Dibney, the elongated man's wife, and from there it spirals into a story of lines being crossed by which supervillains and heroes. Addressing heavy topics like forced mind-wiping, the story made some readers pretty uncomfortable, and when all was said and done, the family members of a few heroes were dead and the reputations of others were tarnished in brand new ways. It's eventually realized by Dr. Midnight, Mr. Terrific, and Batman, all separately I might add, that Sue was murdered using some pretty familiar tech. However, it's not done by someone that you would expect. Cover your ears now if you don't want to hear who it was. Okay, the murderer was Jean Loring, the wife of the Atom who was committed to Arkham Asylum after she's discovered. There are two viewings of Identity Crisis. One is a dark tragedy reflective of the real world, and one is a tenaciously destructive tentacle of the Watchmen squid monster still wriggling around 15 years later. I've only seen the former, but if you've seen the latter, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Haven't read it and want to give it a go? Well, check out 2004's Identity Crisis number 1 all the way to 2005's Identity Crisis number 7. Number 5. Jason Todd's death. The death of Jason Todd was so surprising that it not only shocked readers, it shocked DC themselves. Now, the character has had a pretty weird history, as he was introduced as the new teenage Robin after Dick Grayson grew up and became Nightwing. But fan reaction to Jason was pretty mixed. In 1988, DC Comics writer Denny O'Neil pitched the idea of making the readers vote via a 1-900 number on how a story would end, and O'Neil knew the vote couldn't be on something small, so he decided the vote would be about the fate of the second Robin, Jason Todd. Knowing that Todd was relatively unpopular, it would help settle what needed to be done with the character. So, setting up a 36-hour voting period, readers got one of two numbers to call from the back of Batman number 427. The ending of that issue showed us the Joker beating Todd with a crowbar, leaving him in a warehouse that was set to explode. Then issue 428 came out and the final vote was 5,343 for killing Todd and 5,721 against it, meaning his fate was sealed. Jason Todd was dead, and the iconic image of Batman carrying Todd's body that followed was one that is still recognizable to most comic fans today. Years after the event, O'Neil revealed there was actually someone who programmed their phone to call every 90 seconds for 8 hours. That person chose the same option every time for Jason Todd to die. Totaling around 320 votes from that one person alone, O'Neil has gone on record saying that one person was the reason why Jason died in the first place. If you're not familiar with this storyline, aka a death in the family, check it out for yourself, starting with 1988's Batman Volume 1 number 426 to number 429. Number 4. Alexandra DeWitt's death. For so many heroes, one of their biggest fears is that their secret identity will get out and put their loved ones at risk, so generally they do all they can in order to prevent that from happening. In Kyle Rayner's case, he learned the hard way what happens if you're not careful enough. After taking over the Green Lantern mantle from Hal Jordan and receiving his power ring, Rayner seeks out his girlfriend Alexandra, or Alex DeWitt. DeWitt wasn't sure what to make of the new power Rayner had acquired, but eventually helped Rayner control and understand the potential he had command over. In hindsight, probably not the best idea, because one day he came home and found out that she had been killed by the supervillain Major Force and had been stuffed into a refrigerator. Kyle, obviously upset and motivated by anger and regret, sought out Major Force. Kyle almost killed Major Force before his ring runs out of power, and then Major Force takes over the fight until his quote-unquote green rock that powers the power rings turns into a lantern battery and charges Rayner's ring. Rayner finally subdues Major Force, but when he begins to interrogate Major Force over why he was there and why he killed DeWitt, the police arrive and try to take Rayner away. Rayner obviously flees and runs into Alan Scott, who tries to console him over his loss. DC writer Gail Simone, now a legend in her own right, was horrified that the company had consented to kill a female character in such a gruesome way, merely to motivate the male protagonist. She coined the term "women in refrigerators" for any time women in comics were killed, seriously injured, violated, or depowered merely to motivate male heroes, and she published a long list of such cases. Check out her death for yourself in 1994's Green Lantern Volume 3, number 55. Number 3. Death of Superman. In 1992, in response to not being able to do their original story, which was to have Lois Lane and Clark get married, due to conflicts with the then upcoming Lois and Clark The New Adventures of Superman, the writers of the Superman titles just decided to straight up kill him instead. The way they pulled this off was to introduce a new character, an almost unthinkable monster whose only purpose was to destroy things. Dubbed Doomsday, he cut a swath of destruction towards Metropolis. Jump forward a little bit to 1993 and we see Superman take on this unstoppable bad guy. Now obviously Superman was able to take down the bad guy because he's, Superman, but both Doomsday and Superman ended up succumbing to their injuries at the end of the fight. While some heroes have been resurrected multiple times, this was the first and only time that Clark Kent bit the dust, and it sent shockwaves through the entire world of comics. The aftermath of the story followed how the world reacted and who showed up to take its place, the latter part featuring the introduction of several new characters who stuck around to help form the later DCU. Death of Superman is one of the most far-reaching media events in comics history, and that coupled with the return of Superman changed the rules for DC forever, opening the door for anyone to come back to life. Check out the storyline for yourself so you can see firsthand what this death meant to the DC universe, starting with 1992 Superman The Man of Steel Volume 1, number 18. Number 2. Crisis on Infinite Earths. By the mid-1980s, many of DC's superheroes had been around for about 50 years, and things were starting to get a little bit confusing. Early versions of characters didn't match up with later versions, and the comics had way too many continuity problems regarding ages, time periods, powers. There were just little flaws in continuity everywhere, especially with their bigger characters. Now while most fans were willing to overlook these flaws, it was becoming more and more problematic with each passing year. Crisis on Infinite Earths changed the whole landscape of the DC universe and served as the first time a comic book company would reboot its entire continuity in order to revamp everything. Crisis on Infinite Earths essentially wiped out all of these continuity issues, the multiverse, and even several characters, because back when character deaths actually meant something, giving us a streamlined, consistent DC universe for the first time in a very long time. The storyline itself brought together heroes from all over DC's universes to battle the Anti-Monitor, and ended with some major deaths. As well as resetting the DC universe and revitalizing characters and storylines, Crisis was one of the first major overarching comic book crossover events. It really goes without saying, but if you haven't read this storyline yet, then you're truly missing out, so check out 1985's Crisis on Infinite Earths number 1, all the way to 1986's Crisis on Infinite Earths number 12. And number 1, massive layoffs. This is actually something that Amanda brought to my attention, and when I read more about it, I knew this had to be at the top of our list today. Taking place in early to mid-August, so this month, there were rumors going around that DC had not only laid off a ton of employees, they'd also completely shut down DC Collectibles. Described as an absolute bloodbath by reporters everywhere, those said to have lost their positions are Editor-in-Chief Bob Harris, Senior VP of Publishing Strategies and Support Services Hank Cannells, VP of Marketing and Creative Services Jonah Wieland, VP Global Publishing Initiatives and Digital Strategy Bobby Chase, Senior Story Editor Brian Cunningham, and Executive Director Mark Doyle, who oversaw the rollout of the Black Label graphic novels. That's not even including the other 600 employees that lost their jobs as well, so needless to say, this is a hefty bunch of people who lost their jobs. For now though, it does remain to be seen just how much these layoffs will affect DC and how the publishers will bounce back. Number 10, the Plutonian. If you're familiar with the Irredeemable series, then you will likely already know why I put it so low on the list today, but if you're not, that's no worries. This entire storyline is about the Plutonian, the supposed strongest hero ever to exist, and is all about a superhero snapping and losing control. Very little is known about the Plutonian, even by the people who are supposed to be very close with him, but he draws a lot of parallels with Superman, as he has a Fortress of Solitude-like hideout in a volcano, and not to mention his powers are basically the same with a few more sprinkled in there for fun. Mark Waid, the writer, argues that not all superheroes are mentally equipped to deal with the power and responsibility of being a superhero, so it's bound to happen that one would lose it and just go completely mental. This story follows the Plutonian as he slaughters the people of Earth and all of his former friends, family, and allies. The comic evolves into making the Plutonian a supervillain, or at least shows him in the early stages of it. He's a hero on the edge of losing complete control, and it does a great job of showing how others are meant to deal with the mess that he creates. I highly recommend you check out Boom Studios' Irredeemable series. It has a total of 37 issues, and it really is a great read. Number 9. Green Lantern. The specific Green Lantern that I'll be talking about is Hal Jordan after his home was destroyed in 1992 to 1993's Death of Superman's storyline. At one point during the story, Coast City was destroyed by Mongol, and Hal was not very happy about that, to say the least. To try and resurrect the city back to its former glory, Hal attempts to use the power of his Green Lantern ring, but its power is revoked before he can make it permanent. Consumed by grief and anger, he ends up becoming the villain Parallax and goes on a mass killing spree, killing almost all of the other Green Lanterns so he could take their rings and absorb their power. It ended up getting to the point where Hal was so powerful that he was one of the most feared superheroes in the galaxy, and to date this is considered to be one of the most strongest iterations of the character. And even though it's not really his fault since he was under the control of Parallax, you'd still think that his strong will would at least have tried to resist the temptation, but alas, that wasn't the case. Why not give this story a read for yourself so you can see just how strong Hal became by starting with 1992's Superman, The Man of Steel, Volume 1, number 18.
Up next at 8, Lady Deathstrike. Let's shift from on-panel to on-screen for this number, and take a look at the battle between Lady Deathstrike and Wolverine that occurred in the X2 movie back in the early 2000s. Released in 2003, X2, X-Men United is a film based off of the God Loves, Man Kills graphic novel, with William Stryker leading an assault on the X-Mansion in order to build his own version of Cerebro and cause a mutant genocide. Now, Lady Deathstrike is controlled by Stryker, acting as his bodyguard of sorts, and towards the end of the film, Wolverine and Deathstrike battle. Logan injects her with molten adamantium, and it's not pretty. While he's never murdered her in the comics, Wolverine has fought her plenty of times, with the two of them having quite the complicated history with one another. In at 7, Omega Red. Omega Red is an X-Men supervillain who first debuted in 1992 in X-Men Volume 2, Issue 4. A serial killer in Russia who was captured and then turned over to the KGB, he underwent experiments in an attempt to recreate a super soldier the likes of Captain America, but Soviet. The result was Omega Red, who has carbonadium retractable tentacles that are housed within his arms, a regenerative healing factor, and an ability to absorb others' life forces. He also has super strength, speed, agility, durability, all that jazz, and an ability to secrete pheromones that result in sickness and death. Yikes for that last one. Omega Red is one of Logan's most enduring villains, and once upon a time, Logan straight up murdered him, also using the Murasama blade. Useful tool. The two fought for nearly 18 hours initially before Omega Red bested Logan, which caused the mutant to go after him out of revenge using the Murasama blade, stabbing him right through the heart. In at 6, Daken. Nothing like murdering your own son, am I right? Yeah? No? Well, that is actually something Wolverine has done, and his son Daken was no pushover either. Daken was not raised by Wolverine, but instead by Romulus, and has all the powers and strengths of Daddy Dearest, but with zero moral code. The two eventually duke it out, with Logan feeling the need to end his son in order to prevent any more harm. But it's not easy for him. And as he kills his offspring, his mind ventures into happier fantasies, which is really, really tragic. Like watching his son go to prom, and family moments like sitting around a campfire roasting marshmallows. Oh, I can't. The reality is much harsher. He drowns Daken with the young man dying in his arms. Up next at 5, all of the X-Men. From Old Man Logan. This one is a little dark, as if drowning his own son wasn't. So once upon a time in the Old Man Logan series that takes place in the alternate universe of Earth 807128, the world's supervillains took over, largely slaughtering most of the superheroes on the planet. Now in the process of this conflict, Mysterio created an illusion to trick Logan into thinking that the X-Men were actually villains, luring him into battle and ultimately resulting in him unintentionally slaughtering all of them. After the illusion was lifted, Logan was filled with grief, ran into the woods, and tried to commit suicide. When that failed, he swore to never pop his claws again, leaving his past life behind. While the X-Men definitely weren't expecting to be taken out by a fellow teammate, it does go to show how strong Wolverine is if he was able to kill all of them. I mean, sure, he had the element of surprise, but it's not like he didn't have any resistance from them whatsoever in battle. On the flip side of that, let's move on to number 4, all of the villains. In Horsemen of War, we see a reverse of our previous number. Rather than killing all of his teammates, Logan takes on every single villain of the X-Men's and kills them. Homicide, it's a common theme on this list. This is a product of a what-if story in which the hypothetical explored is what if Wolverine was transformed into a Horseman of War by Apocalypse? The answer is pretty dark. Wolverine becomes the ultimate threat, not only killing Apocalypse himself, but going on a murderous spree in which he knocks off every known criminal and villain. His victims include Magneto, Mr. Sinister, Sabretooth, Mystique, Juggernaut, and more. Because of this massacre, the rest of the world got so concerned that governments actually started to hunt him down. But they didn't need to be that concerned after all. After completing his goal, Wolverine ended up going into hiding, becoming a monk at a monastery under the name of Brother Xavier. Next up at number 3, himself. There's no greater battle than the one you have with yourself. Or at least, you can expect it to be one hell of a tough one if you're as strong as Wolverine is. The 616 Wolverine fought an alternate version of himself from Earth 61112, the Age of Ultron timeline. Now in that future timeline, Ultron has taken over the world and Wolverine, along with Sue Storm, is sent back to kill Hank Pym to prevent it. Hank being the man who created Ultron in the comics. Now once they've done that, they return to their own timeline only to discover that it has radically altered it for the worst. With Hank dead, the Kree-Skrull conflict spread to Earth and created more devastation. They end up encountering the Defenders in this timeline and Wolverine ends up fighting himself, with the time-traveling Logan killing himself in the brawl. In at number 2, Magneto. Magneto generally has the upper hand against Wolverine. Logan's skeleton is plated with adamantium after all, which is metal. Magneto even once ripped it from his bones in one of the most disturbing attacks on an X-Men member in history. But Wolverine has gotten his day in the sun as far as the Master of Magnetism is concerned. In the Uncanny X-Men arc, Eve of Destruction, Magneto is thwarted by the X-Men team, and when he tries to make peace with them, Logan decided to take the opposite route, not falling for his tricks. He impales him with his claws, and the team leave Magneto on the ground, bleeding out. They also have a drink afterwards too, which kind of feels weird because it's like, hey, we just left a dude to bleed on the ground, but it was Magneto, so... And last but not least, in our number 1 spot, Jean Grey. In X-Men Phoenix and Song, Jean Grey is so overcome with the Phoenix Force that she's no longer able to control it. She's unable to rid herself of it, and she's become an all-powerful antagonistic force, threatening the universe itself. Rather than become the Dark Phoenix again, she ends up turning to someone outside of herself for help. That someone is Logan. And he does her bidding. He ends up driving his claws through her body multiple times in order to kill her, despite the amount of internal pain this causes him. This even played out in X-Men The Last Stand on the big screen in the film adaptation. And in all forms, it's a pretty tragic moment.
Number 10, Sauron. While Sauron might not be the most conventional of mutants in the sense that he wasn't born a mutant, he was mutated from a human to Pteranodon, after suffering an attack from gigantic Pteranodons who escaped the Savage Land. Their bites transformed him so that not only did he now resemble them, but he also found he had the ability and need to feed and drain on the life force energy of others to survive. I think he found that out through his dog too, which is sad. No, not the dog. So while not immune in the same way that the X-Men are, being heavily mutated, I think we can count him as a mutant for the purpose of this list. Spider-Man and his team of X-Men classmates ended up teaming up and defeating Sauron in Spider-Man and the X-Men. And yeah, you heard me right. There is a mini-series where Spider-Man joins the X-Men and is put in charge of a class. Even though he's not quite a mutant, but he's a mutate, so I guess it's fine. Number 9, Deadpool. Speaking of mutates, these two have crossed paths quite a few times now, although I'm still waiting for that MCU team up for them. Come on, Marvel, Disney, make this happen for us. It needs to be a thing. But while Deadpool is usually seen as a huge Spidey fan, and Spider-Man for the most part tries to be good about tolerating Deadpool's ridiculous behavior, and sometimes he's actually even a fan of him too, in the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon, Spider-Man gets pulled into Deadpool's zany world to battle. In Deadpool's reality-warping mind, Spider-Man becomes just a whale and Deadpool the harpooner that is hunting him with puns. That's right, this actually leads to a pun-off full of verbal insults and zingers, which ends with Spider-Man defeating him by throwing the figurative and literal book at him, the Book of Morality. Nothing knocks out Deadpool like smacking him with the hard and hefty weight of responsibility. And yeah, like I said, I know Deadpool isn't really a full mutant and is considered a mutate, but I was willing to consider him an honorable mutant for this list because I just can't resist an opportunity to talk about Spider-Man and Deadpool's relationship in a video. The bromance is so strong between them.
In at number 8, Thor. The God of Thunder lost his arm. That was a thing that happened in the aftermath of Original Sin. Now at the time, Thor had become unworthy of wielding Mjolnir, so he substitutes it in the meantime for an axe called Yarnborn, which was all fine and dandy until Malekith the Accursed shows up, fights him, and then slices off his arm with his own weapon. Thor is then left to die at the bottom of the ocean. Eventually, though, he would return with a metal arm, while the female Jane Foster Thor wielded the hammer in the meantime. Moving on to number 7, Red Arrow. Red Arrow's loss of his right arm was particularly brutal and gory. In 2009's Justice League Cry for Justice miniseries, Green Arrow teamed up with Green Lantern to create a proactive team to hunt down criminals before they committed their crimes. Very Minority Report meets Civil War II of them. And similar to both of those narratives, precognitive crime prevention just didn't cut it. But Roy Harper's arm did, ba-dum-bum-tsh. In this case, Prometheus infiltrates the League pretending to be Shazam, and when Harper finds out, Prometheus cuts off his arm. If that wasn't bad enough, after Roy comes to in the hospital, he finds out that his daughter and his city were also blown up while he was passed out. Not a good day for Roy Harper. In at 6, Red Tornado. Created in 1968, the Red Tornado is a sentient android with superhuman strength and durability, and can create cyclone-force winds, allowing him to fly, enhance his speed, create storms, etc. Now in Justice League of America, Red Tornado's soul is tricked into entering the body of a human instead of his android body. He ends up crossing paths with an intelligent Solomon Grundy, who then beats the crap out of him and tears him limb from limb. Grundy then leaves him to bleed out. Luckily for Red Tornado, the Justice League get there just as he's dying, and Zatanna uses her magic to return him to his android body. Still, the image of Grundy ripping off his mortal flesh, revealing raw bone, is something that we can't forget. But apparently DC can, because they've retconned the character entirely out of existence since the New 52, so there you have it. In at 5, Adam Eve. Departing from DC and Marvel for this number, let's take a look at Adam Eve from Invincible. Adam Eve is Samantha Eve Wilkins, a superhero who began her career as a teenager and eventually got hitched to Mark Grayson, aka Invincible, the title character. That marriage put a bit of a target on her back, with her being the aim of multiple villains' attempts to get to her husband. She was once killed by Viltrumite, but resurrected herself. During a battle between Mark and a former teammate called Robot rips off Eve's leg. She's pregnant when that happens too. Despite it being a very gruesome moment, she ended up getting a prosthetic leg, made from Viltrumite technology. In at 4, Wolverine. Straying a little from the norm here at this number. So, Wolverine has lost his hand a whole lot, but not in the 616 continuity, in alternate universes. Let's start off with the Wolverine known as Weapon X in the Age of Apocalypse universe, Earth 295. Now he's missing a hand thanks to Cyclops, who is also missing an eye thanks to Wolverine. Cyclops is evil in this universe, and Logan is married to Jean Grey, so more fuel for their fire. Then there's the Logan of the Marvel Mangaverse, who has one hand with adamantium claws and another with laser claws. This is thanks to a battle that he had with his brother in this universe, Cyclops, who cut off his hand. But he got revenge in this universe too. An eye for a claw, people. To add insult to injury, or I guess more injury to injury we suppose, Logan was also ripped in half by the Hulk in the Ultimate Universe. It was not a good moment for him, clearly. In at number 3, Cyborg. Cyborg Victor Stone first debuted in 1980's DC Comics Presents issue 26. The son of scientist Silas Stone, his initial origin story featured him falling victim to a failed experiment in which his body needed to be rebuilt by Daddy Dearest in order to keep him alive. In the New 52, this origin was revised. He became Cyborg when a mother box blew up in front of him during Darkseid's invasion of Earth. Half his body is destroyed, and his own body is trying to kill the rest of him, but his father saves him with Star Labs technology. Moving on to our number 2 spot, Bucky Barnes. When we were first introduced to James Buchanan Bucky Barnes, he was the army brat turned young sidekick for Captain America, first seen in Captain America Comics issue 1 back in March of 1941. After a fateful mission in which Cap and Bucky attempted to stop an experimental drone plane of Baron Zemos, with an explosive on it of course, Steve is launched into the sea where he's frozen in suspended animation until found by the Avengers years later. And Bucky is presumed dead. Turns out he wasn't though. He was found by the Soviets, his body cold preserved with the exception of his left arm, which was severed from his body in the explosion, presumably. That arm would become a notable trait of Bucky's moving forward, as he would be revealed to be the Winter Soldier, a foe for Cap at first, but then an ally. And last but definitely not least, in at number 1, Aquaman. When we think of a superhero losing a limb, often the first one who comes to mind is Aquaman, perhaps because he's lost his limbs more than once. The same limb more than once. Come on, Aquaman. Aquaman Arthur Curry has had a bit of a troubled past from a publishing standpoint. Largely thanks to his Silver Age wackiness and portrayal in the animated series Super Friends, Aquaman has long been the butt of many jokes. He talks to fish. He rides on seahorses. You can see why DC has been so adamant on trying to make Arthur a little less campy and a little more cool. One of those attempts was in the 90s when Peter David was writing for The King of Atlantis. In Aquaman issue 2 in 1994, a villain called Charybdis absorbed Aquaman's ability to communicate with sea life and then shoved Aquaman's hand in piranha-infested waters. That's kind of a low blow. The result? Well, Aquaman lost his hand. His hand would be replaced with a harpoon because, water-themed of course, and he would eventually get a mystical replacement too called the Water-Bearer Hand, made for him by the Lady of the Lake. Years later, after he was killed and resurrected, he ended up losing that hand yet again when fighting Black Manta. But after Brightest Day, he ended up becoming a water elemental and got his hand back that way. So I guess that's a good thing. Still, to lose the same hand twice, it's gotta hurt, emotionally. Definitely emotionally. Doesn't do much for the confidence. Starting us off in at number 10, U.S. Agent. U.S. Agent, aka John Walker, first hit the scene in 1986 as Super Patriot, a cocky antagonist of Steve Rogers. Later, he would claim Captain America's mantle after Rogers felt he was no longer advocating in the best interest of the American people, and had become tied down to a political agenda. John Walker didn't care as much about those things. Eventually, in 1989, when the true Cap came back, Walker would become U.S. Agent. He decided to show off his patriotism and joined the fight against Norman Osborn in the Siege event, and in Mighty Avengers issue 36, he tried to stop the Thunderbolts from stealing Odin's spear. In the process, he got his left arm and left leg chopped off with the weapon courtesy of Nuke. Moving on to number 9, Risk. The whole Superboy Prime evil freakout is an iconic one, and also rather silly in many respects. Regardless of your opinion on it, one thing is for certain. Risk got maimed, and it was pretty darn nasty. In Infinite Crisis 4, Superboy Prime goes on a rampage and ends up killing a slew of heroes. And he also maims a bunch of them too, including prior Teen Titans member Risk, aka Cody Driscoll. It's a brief moment, but we do see his whole arm sliced off of his body thanks to Superboy's heat vision. Later, in Teen Titans issue 32, we learned that Cody almost bled out because of it.
Number 8. Ant-Man. The specific series that I'll be talking about for Ant-Man is the Ultimatum series that ran in 2016, and yes, I know that it's not considered canon by many people, but we're not talking canon, we're talking about losing control, and that's exactly what happened to Ant-Man in this twisted storyline. Within the first 5 pages of the first issue, everything goes terribly wrong as out of nowhere the sky darkens and all of Manhattan is flooded, and many of our heroes are submerged underwater. Some are lucky enough to resurface, but unfortunately Janet Van Dyne, aka the Wasp, drowned and Hank was unable to find her no matter how hard he tried. Following the tidal wave and in the second issue after the water had cleared, we see the entire city of Manhattan in shambles and overrun with criminals doing their thing, and this is exactly when we see Ant-Man and Hawkeye come across the villain the Blob as he's feasting on Janet's body. This obviously did not sit well with Hank, so standing at about 60 stories tall as Giant Man, he just picks up the Blob, states that he is not going to play around with him, and then straight up just bites his head off and spits it out on the ground. The loss of a loved one can really push people to do some crazy things, and apparently it can push a hero to the point of murder. Check out the storyline for yourself, or feel free to skip ahead to issue 3, where this gruesome scene takes place. Number 7. Daredevil. In 2003's Daredevil Volume 2 number 49, we get to see a side of Daredevil that we rarely get to see. Obviously Matt Murdock has gone off the rails a few times and flipped out thanks to his bad temper, but man, this was different. In this issue we see Bullseye show up at Matt's place after he's already killed Karen Page and Elektra, just to kill another one of his girlfriends, and upon his arrival Matt immediately throws him out a window and begins the beatdown of a lifetime. He took so much joy from beating the villain and mocking the Bullseye tattoo on his forehead, and just to really bring home the rage and get his point across, Daredevil grabbed a rock from the ground and carved the bullseye into the villain's forehead, making it even more permanent than it already was by forever scarring it. It's not even the action that's so insane, because like I said, with Ant-Man, the loss of a loved one can really lead you to do some pretty crazy things, but it's his reaction afterward, just smiling ear to ear, biggest grin you've ever seen in your life. Give this issue a read for yourself to see how truly merciless DD can really be, because man, saying I was surprised is truly an understatement. Number 6. Cyclops. Scott Summers has always had trouble controlling his powers, that's no secret, but during the events of 2012's Avengers vs. X-Men, it only got worse. In this 12-issue storyline, we see the Phoenix Force get fragmented and inhabit 5 prominent characters in the X-Men universe: Cyclops, Emma Frost, Colossus, Magic, and Namor, and the whole storyline basically watches the Avengers and the X-Men do their best to take down the Phoenix Force. In issue 11, we saw a crazed Phoenix Force-powered Cyclops lose himself to his newfound thirst for power. The issue ended with a big showdown between Cyclops and his mentor, Professor Xavier. Xavier tried to convince his surrogate son to relinquish the powers and come back to the good side, but Cyclops resisted and instead embraced the full power of the Phoenix and killed Charles Xavier. This was such a shocking moment because Scott is normally so level-headed and controlled, and to see him so power-hungry and full of rage is a side of him I never thought we would see. It can be argued that it wasn't his fault since he wasn't the mastermind behind everything, but he is still the one who lost control and snapped, so he has to deal with what he did. Number 5. Green Arrow. Another character who is usually pretty good at keeping his cool. However, in 2010's Justice League Cry for Justice storyline, his patience and control are pushed to their absolute limits, and needless to say, he did not deal with the pressure too well. This was all thanks to Prometheus, a villain determined to attack superheroes and hit them where it hurts the most. In this story, the Red Arrow had his arm completely ripped off, and then his daughter was crushed as part of Prometheus' plan. This really pissed off the Green Arrow, but he decided to let Prometheus go after he'd been captured, and it seemed like, for a time, that the Green Arrow had kept his emotions in check. But then the scene shifted to Prometheus' lair, and we saw that was not the case, even in the slightest. Prometheus heard a noise behind him, and when he turned to investigate, he saw that Green Arrow had come to pay him a little visit. After a very brief discussion, the Green Arrow shoots an arrow straight into Prometheus' forehead, sticking him to the wall and killing him, stating that Prometheus never knew that at his core, Green Arrow wasn't a hero. He was a hunter. Check the storyline out for yourself and let me know what you think about it in the comments below. I personally love Green Arrow, and I think this ruthless side of him is pretty freaking sweet. Number 4. Spider-Man. Back in Black, a great AC/DC song, but also a Spider-Man storyline that ran in 2007. After a sniper's bullet changes everything for Peter Parker and his life, he dons his infamous black costume once more. From then on, Spider-Man would stop at nothing to find the man who pulled the trigger and, even more important, the man who gave the order to kill. This is truly Spider-Man at his darkest hour. Now, I realize that was probably a little bit vague, so I'll just tell you straight up. Aunt May is the one who was shot, and this caused Peter to go off the rails. He tracked down everyone involved with the shooting and found that it all led to the Kingpin. He found the Kingpin in prison and he beat the living daylights out of him. He beat him within an inch of his life and then promised to kill him if Aunt May was to actually die. After he beat him to a pulp and got Fisk really scared, Peter decided to let him live with the shame of being handily beaten by a guy half his size in front of literally everyone in prison. Certainly surprising that the joke-filled webhead could be so ruthless, but I don't know, can you really blame him? Give the storyline a read for yourself by checking out 2007's Amazing Spider-Man number 539 to 543. Number 3. The Hulk. You always have to include the Hulk on any list that involved the hero losing control, because it's the Hulk, it's kind of his thing. In World War Hulk, the sequel to Planet Hulk, the Hulk is married to Terra, and they have a child on the way. After he is tricked by the Illuminati and sent into space with her, their spaceship exploded and she and the unborn child were unfortunately killed. Now, we all know that the Hulk has a very bad temper during the best of times, so you can only imagine what this tragedy did to him. I feel like I don't need to say it, but I will anyways. He went absolutely insane. He traveled from place to place, smashing everyone and everything in his path, and he single-handedly destroyed so many different superheroes that I won't even start to list them because I would be here for hours. Eventually his rage grows to such an extreme that the radiation threatens the entire Earth and he is taken down to save the planet. Even if you consider how grouchy the Hulk is and how often he loses it, this is entirely a different level for him. Give the story a read for yourself, starting with 2007's World War Hulk Prologue World Breaker Volume 1. Number 2. Wolverine. You probably know what I'm going to be talking about if you're a fan of the X-Men series when it comes to Wolverine. In the Wolverine Old Man Logan storyline, we get to see the vicious side of Wolverine that we have all come to know and love. However, this time it wasn't necessarily his fault. So basically it's the future and Logan is now an old man, and he hasn't used the Wolverine persona or his claws since this mysterious night in the past when a bunch of villains supposedly attacked. We learned through some flashbacks that a massive group of 40 supervillains attacked the X-Men mansion, and during this attack, Wolverine gets in touch with his primal side and goes absolutely crazy and kills every single one of them. After the fight and the intense slaughter, things change and Wolverine realizes it was all just an illusion. The entire time Wolverine had his vision and mind altered by Mysterio, and all the villains that he killed in combat were actually his fellow X-Men. This destroyed Logan, and he decided to retire his Wolverine mantle after that, essentially killing that part of him so he would never do something like that again. It's definitely a very sad way to end a run as a hero, but I see why he felt that was necessary. Give this a read for yourself, starting with 2018's Old Man Logan, Volume 1, Number 1, and while you're at it, why not rewatch the movie Logan and see if you can, I don't know, draw any comparison. Number 1, Terra. If you're like me, then your first introduction to Terra was probably through the Teen Titans TV show, and man, I always remember thinking how cool of a character she was, and in the specific issue that I'm going to be talking about today, we get to see exactly how crazy strong she can be. The Dark Multiverse Teen Titans The Judas Contract reimagines one of the most renowned stories in comic book history, the Judas Contract. In this reimagining, Terra's betrayal starts with not the Teen Titans, but with Deathstroke himself. Now free from her mentor's influence and supercharged by the same serum that turned Slade Wilson into the world's deadliest man, Terra works to forge a new destiny written in the Teen Titans' blood. Now calling herself Gaia and viewing herself as a literal goddess, she changed her costume and attacked the Teen Titans Tower, killing Raven, Starfire, Wonder Girl, and Cyborg before battling against Robin and Kid Flash, who she was also able to overpower and kill.
Coming in at number 10, we have Quicksilver, the speedster that both Fox and Disney were throwing into the movies, which had a lot of comic fans confused. Like, how many nerds out there had to explain to their friends why the same character was in 2 movies but played by different people, but they weren't in the same universe? Thankfully, the MCU is now all connected and we don't need to have that conversation again, as long as Sony doesn't try to rip Spider-Man away from us. I couldn't handle that another time. For fans of the X-Men comics, you will be well aware of the House of M storyline. This was one of the most monumental events that has ever happened in the Marvel Universe, and it changed the mutant race forever. Scarlet Witch was going through an immense amount of emotional stress, and she was at her breaking point and decided that she would use her reality-altering powers to reshape the world forever. She called out, "No more humans," and the population of superpowered beings that was in the range of 1.2 million was now pulled down to less than 200. Over 1 million mutants were stripped of their powers, and Quicksilver was along with them. I wonder how it felt experiencing the crushing boredom of traffic for the first time ever in your life. Coming in at number 9, we have the Green Lantern. Hal Jordan has often been used as a representation of the man when it comes to any sort of social issue brought up in the DC universe when he's involved. After all, he is a cop, so it kind of fits the bill for his character. Well, in the 70s, there was a lot going on in the world when it came to American politics, and DC wanted to take this on with Green Lantern and the Green Arrow. They were going down to try and calm the American people. Do you think these two guys became friends just because they both wear green? It was like the easiest form of association. Well, the two of them went down to confront some American miners who were protesting for better wages. And because Hal had been spending so much time on Earth, his ring was feeling a little bit weak. He tried to confront the miners to get them to stop, and in this moment, his ring lost all of its power. Also, the miners were fully locked and loaded with guns, so it was a little bit of a sticky situation.
Number 8, House of M. This 8-part event written by Brian Michael Bendis starts off rather beautiful, dare I say. Wanda Maximoff is giving birth to her new twins. Vision is by her side, and then Xavier's voice just pops in out of nowhere, demanding that Wanda returns the world to normal. She refuses, and she hangs on to her children, and they shatter. The world goes away, and Wanda returns back to the normal world, where she has no twins, but she's in a dark room on Genosha. And he uses his powers to put her back to sleep. Then in comes Magneto, and he asks about his daughter's progress, and Charles is afraid, because at this point, her power is too much to handle. Now in Avengers Tower, the team is discussing on what to do with Wanda. The ideas are getting kind of dark, because they have to. Wolverine is suggesting that they just take out Wanda, just killing her, which is pretty dark. But then when Quicksilver passes on this gossip, Wanda then warps reality into a world called House of M, where mutants were top dogs and Magneto and his family just ruled them all. Other Marvel heroes were given their desires, like Peter was married to Gwen Stacy, Cyclops is married to Emma Frost, and Doctor Strange is a psychologist. The world is completely different, but the only person who remembers real life is Wolverine, the same guy who suggested that they Wanda. Things took a turn and the event became even more stressful when Wanda uttered those 3 words in issue 7. No more mutants. Number 7, Secret Empire. In Avengers Endgame, Steve uses future knowledge to obtain the scepter. He says, "Hail Hydra," Rumlow gives it over, no elevator fight needed. Nice. It was a fun moment in the theater, but the line, "Hail Hydra," comes right from the comics, but this time around it's not that entertaining. The last words come from Steve after the Avengers standoff event, where it's revealed he's actually a sleeper agent of Hydra. Another pawn of the Red Skull after all. This was huge news. I mean, fans were really upset. Readers were sending in death threats to the writers. The 2017 series Secret Empire was wild. The team had to go against their own leader, Cap, who was trying to take over the government with Hydra, and then eventually run all of the United States. It was crazy. Bad Steve took out Rick Jones, he took out Black Widow. I mean, it's fair, readers were upset, really. This is a nightmare. In the end, it was concluded that bad Cap was a double and good Cap was actually locked in the Cosmic Cube. Number 6, Axis. When Red Skull abducted numerous mutants and Inhumans, Magneto tracked him down. Now at the same time, Scarlet Witch, Rogue, and Havoc were captured by Red Skull's S-Men and brought to the island / horror camp. The Avengers escaped and saved Magneto. Magneto gave Red Skull the beatdown of a lifetime. He got caught up in the moment and went a little bit too far perhaps. Magneto says that he did what had to be done, and he thinks that he saved countless amount of lives. But then Red Onslaught rises to the challenge. Red Skull is reborn, this time he's bigger and badder. The X-Men and Avengers team up to stop Red Onslaught, where a number of heroes inverted. Yeah, their personality and moral compass just totally flipped, which certainly didn't help the situation at all. But the fun part is when our villains also get inverted and they join the Avengers to stop Red Onslaught. So it's a mess, it's a big fun mess. Number 5, Age of Ultron. This one just starts off hot, right off the bat. Hawkeye is sneaking into this abandoned building, just taking dudes out slowly. They have Spider-Man captured and he looks terrible. He looks like he just got hit by a freight train. Now in the MCU, Tony and Bruce are the masterminds behind Ultron, but in the comics, it was actually Hank Pym. Ultron made his first debut back in 1968 in Avengers issue 54, and in the comics, Hank Pym was actually the father of Ultron. He actually has the same brain patterns as Hank Pym, because he figured it needed personality, much like our MCU version of Ultron is another personality of Tony Stark's. So cut to the comic event Age of Ultron by Brian Michael Bendis. We see Ultron in all of his glory and it's quite menacing. The world is just trashed. He's from the future and he's here to take over the planet. The death toll reaches billions, including some of our favorite heroes. If you haven't read it, strongly recommend. Much better than the movie Age of Ultron, which was just like the weekend of Ultron, rather. Number 4, Civil War. Okay, the opening scene of Endgame is wild. The remaining heroes, minus Tony Stark, head out into space to take on Thanos, with the help this time of Captain Marvel. They actually sneak up on him and they cut the gauntlet off his arm in like 6 seconds. They kind of win really fast. See, when the Avengers are united and they have a plan, things work out. The other crew in space in Infinity War couldn't even get the gauntlet off of Thanos. Quill was freaking out, the gravity was off, Thanos had the stones, it was tricky. But if Civil War never happened, I fully believe that they would have handled Thanos as a team much sooner. But by the time Thanos begins his quest for the stones, Tony and Steve aren't even on speaking terms. Okay. This all comes down to the events from Captain America Civil War. Now this ends with Tony and Steve fighting it out and Cap drops the shield. Tony blasts off Bucky's arm. It's heartbreaking to say the least, but it's one of my favorite Marvel movies. For some reason. I like watching people lose. I don't know what it is. Number 3, Avengers Disassembled. Brought to us from the mind again of Brian Michael Bendis, Avengers Disassembled is a 5-parter that brings the team together just to be torn apart again. It is a ride. The story begins with the Avengers mansion sensors blasting to warn the team of an intruder. Now the intruder is the Jack of Hearts, who actually died beforehand saving Cassie, Ant-Man's daughter. So what's going on here? Why is he here? Well, Jack blows up, taking half the mansion out with him, along with the life of Ant-Man. That's crazy. And then the Vision crash lands with the Quinjet, starts attacking the rest of the survivors, and then She-Hulk comes out and rips Vision into 2. And then while She-Hulk was going nuts, she accidentally hurt Wasp, Captain America, and Captain Britain. She-Hulk ended up leaving the group because of the guilt inside after she just wreaked havoc. Now this whole event is wild, even before Scarlet Witch is revealed to be behind it all. Spoiler alert. This is when Wanda lost her 2 kids because, well, they weren't actually her 2 kids. They were created from Mephisto. So she was upset. Eventually, she was defeated by Doctor Strange and Magneto took over from there. Now, this is where people, and I, want Wanda to go in the MCU. Perhaps studying the Darkhold and the recent loss of Tommy and Billy, she might make a big bad comeback. Who knows? Number 2, Avengers Red Zone. Avengers Volume 3 Issue 65, titled Avengers Red Zone, is a 6-parter that begins with this mysterious red cloud coming through South Dakota. Oh, this is a nightmare. So it's bringing a plague, basically. It's a red mist of doom. It's kind of like the movie The Mist, but without monsters, although it's just as terrifying. So everybody wears masks, because you know that's what happens when there's a plague and you don't want to die, you wear masks. Weird concept, I know. But it's still a war zone. People are dying off fast. Now in comes Captain America and the Avengers to save the day, figure out what's going on. And the team struggles here a lot. They get sick, they get infected, their motivation is just low, their team members are dying off, and things come to a fun turn when Iron Man and Black Panther create a cure. Great, but Iron Man gets trapped by Red Skull come part 6. The team is not looking good at this point. Cap is down, so Tony takes his suit off and exposes himself to the mist in order to give Steve CPR. No sacrifice, no victory. Sam Witwicky. And finally, number 1, Infinity Gauntlet. Coming from the minds of Jim Starlin, George Perez, and Ron Lim, Infinity Gauntlet was released in 1991, and Avengers Infinity War mirrored a lot of what happened from that event. Yes, Thanos wanted to take out half the universe because he wanted to impress Mistress Death this time around. He wanted to be her equal, whereas in the movie, he just wanted to fill people's bellies. The film adaptation was, in my opinion, Marvel's best work. All those characters in one movie, it felt smooth, didn't feel long, it didn't feel slow at any part. It's kind of great. In the movie, when Thanos is obtaining these gems, he toys with the Avengers in a similar way. In the comic, he turned them into strings and cubes, and then in Infinity War, Drax and Mantis had that happen to them as well. Even in theaters, I was like, this looks familiar, the whole cube thing. There's plenty of other references, it's awesome, and it's hard to make a list about the Avengers losing and not including the time we all paid them over $2 billion to lose. And that was Avengers Infinity War. Thanks, Russo brothers. Killing it. Well guys, there you have it. The Avengers are great for the most part, but sometimes you need to get your ass handed to you in order to make the step up. You gotta lose and then win, it's part of the fun.
In at number 10, Sabretooth. Sabretooth is one of Wolverine's main foes. Both birthed from the Weapon X program, to an extent, the two have clashed numerous times over the years, both on panel and on screen. And while Logan has bested Sabretooth plenty of times, none beats when he straight up decapitated the mutant using the Murasama Blade. Now the Murasama Blade is a weapon in the Marvel Universe that neutralizes healing powers. Logan used this against Victor Creed to not only slice off his arm, but also to cut off his head. Moving on to number 9, Deadpool. Is Deadpool a mutant? Sometimes he claims to be, sometimes he's not. Regardless of your opinion on this, or what is technically canon, Wade Wilson, also a product of the Weapon X program's experiments, is a very strong foe that has lost to Wolverine in the past. This went down in Cable and Deadpool issue 44, when Wolverine ends up skewering Deadpool to a wall with his claws when the two duke it out at a Hydra base. It's a pretty epic duel, with both heroes doing an impressive job, but turns out that 6 blades are in fact better than 2. Sorry, Deadpool.
Number 8, Angel. These two ran into one another in an issue of Marvel Team-Up Volume 1, issue number 4, featuring Spider-Man and the X-Men. Like most team-ups, this one starts with the X-Men coming to blows with Spider-Man after Professor Xavier reads an article in the newspaper that tells him that a scientist and a former colleague of his has been kidnapped by the masked vigilante Spider-Man. First up is Warren Worthington III, Angel. Understandably, Angel was no match for Spider-Man, who already had practice when it came to flying enemies thanks to his own villain, the Vulture. He has run-ins with the Vulture pretty early on in his own series, so. Webbing combined with his quick reflexes and acrobatics allow him to easily beat Angel in one-on-one combat. So yeah, if you think just because you can fly you're gonna be able to get away, no, no, no. Number 7, Nightcrawler. The first time these two fought, it was an even match, although I will say that Spider-Man, it looked to me that he actually had the upper hand. It also happened in his own series in Amazing Spider-Man issue 161, which bodes well for our web-singing hero should they have actually needed to come to blows and actually have a fight. This was one of those misunderstanding fights, as team-ups usually go. And like most instances of superheroes fighting one another, this of course was just a misunderstanding. Nightcrawler and Spider-Man both thought that the other actually might be a murderer, who they both happened to trying to be tracked down at the same time. And at the end of the issue, the Punisher would actually show up to complicate things further, then he would get involved. The first fight between Nightcrawler and Spider-Man ends with Spider-Man managing to pin Nightcrawler down, but unfortunately Kurt teleports away before Spidey can turn him into the authorities. But we've also seen Spider-Man full-on beat Kurt in a fight that I'm going to dive into later in this list. Don't worry, I'll come back to it. Number 6, Cyclops. You would think that optic blasts beat Spider-Man, right? Like you could cook a spider with an optic blast, couldn't you? Just blast it apart, or I don't know. Well, You'd be wrong. Cyclops actually has had a few attempts at trying to blast Spider-Man in the comics, but even with his insane level of precision with his optic blast while using his visor, the problem he runs into is he can never actually hit Spider-Man. Spider-Man is simply too agile and always manages to dodge Cyclops' attacks. We also see this in the Marvel team-up issue that I was talking about earlier, issue number 4, and Jean Grey is the one who actually has to step in to get the job done when it comes to capturing Spider-Man, using her telekinesis. And yet, in the same issue, she somehow manages to momentarily get kidnapped by Morbius. She goes from being like the most powerful to being like, oh no, I'm kidnapped. I was like, wait, but can't you just telekinesis Morbius to, I don't know. I'm not writing this, obviously. I'm not writing these old school comics, so it's not up to me. Number 5, Sabretooth. In issue 116 of Spectacular Spider-Man, Peter crosses paths with Sabretooth when he shows up to attack Black Cat, who had just escaped the Foreigner's clutches. Sabretooth was sent to make her pay, and while Felicia doesn't seem to be afraid of Sabretooth's threats to skin her alive, Spider-Man returns just as Victor is set to pounce on her. The two tussle, and Peter leaves Victor crying out when he shoots him in the face with his webbing. Victor rips the webbing off his face, in the process doing damage with his own claws, proving that not only is Spider-Man stronger than Sabretooth this time around, but he seems to be quite a bit smarter too. Like, Victor, you did that to yourself. What you doing? Number 4, Wolverine. Spider-Man and Wolverine have always had a kind of frenemy status, often finding it hard to see eye to eye on things. They've traveled through time and space together, swapped bodies, and been forced to go on all kinds of adventures together. They also both seem to have a thing for MJ, which has gotten Logan into trouble more than once with Peter Parker. In the video game Spider-Man Web of Shadows, however, it's the fact that Wolverine thinks Spider-Man smells off that prompts him to fight him. What Logan is actually smelling is a symbiote within Peter Parker, but still Logan is hesitant to trust Spider-Man, choosing to question him instead, while you as Spider-Man are forced to fight against him. Logan believes that the symbiote has taken control of you. Being of course that you are the protagonist in the game, you end up coming on top and convincing Wolverine that you are in fact the real Peter Parker, and that you are the one in control between you and your symbiote, despite what he may or may not smell. You also have to answer a lot of questions during that fight. Number 3, Iceman. Also coming at us from Marvel Team Up is another popular and original member of the X-Men team, Bobby Drake, aka Iceman. Spider-Man manages to smash through Iceman's ice slide, making him fall and easily defeating him. Spidey even suggests to Iceman that he and Human Torch should hang out more because both seem to have a lot to learn. Ooh, sick burn, pun intended. And you know, in the 70s, this may actually have been true, as Spider-Man has already proved his mettle at this point by taking on the entire Fantastic Four team as well. Spider-Man just kicks everybody's butt. Number 2, Colossus. Known as being the strongest member of the X-Men, even Colossus was no match for Spider-Man. This fight happened in the Secret Wars series out of the 80s in issue number 3. He takes out Colossus in one panel. Granted, Spider-Man also seems to have the element of surprise on his side here. Professor X has only just managed to warn everyone that he senses Spider-Man while Spider-Man is in the process of dropping in. He defeats Colossus in one panel using his webbing to blind him, because for those of us who are used to seeing, not being able to see, I guess is kind of everybody's weakness. So there you go, blind Colossus and you can defeat him. Number 1, all of the X-Men. And during this fight in Secret Wars, Spider-Man ended up taking on and defeating all of the X-Men as well, at least all of the X-Men that were there at the time. Considering that Peter Parker is known for being friends of quite a few mutants, it might surprise you to hear that he'd even battled the X-Men. But this was during their time on Beyonder's Battle World, where Spider-Man had just overheard them discussing mutant oppression and joining with Magneto. And you know, Magneto's a bad guy. So this just rubbed Spidey the wrong way, and he decided to attack, revealing that he'd heard their plan and he was gonna rat them out. I mean, I get why he attacked them to stop them, but confessing you're gonna rat them out seems like a bad move. He dodges attacks from Cyclops and Storm, swats Wolverine out of the way with one hand, ties up Rogue and hangs her from a pipe, and sticks Nightcrawler in a spot where his teleportation abilities appear to be disabled. This is the defeat that I was talking about earlier for Kurt, by the way. It was pretty impressive, and at the end of it, he left Logan, if you can believe it, actually remarking how lucky the X-Men were that that was all that Spider-Man had done to them. In his opinion, it could have been way worse. Of course, Xavier did manage to at least wipe Spider-Man's memories of the conversation just as he was getting away, proving that Spider-Man is still no match for a powerful psionic mutant.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Avengers Under Siege. Written by Roger Stern, released in 1987, this is their first big battle after taking on Loki. It's a fan favorite, so I figured I'd start with this one. It began back in Avengers issue 270, when the Avengers were still living in Tony Stark's mansion in New York. It was comfortable until Baron Zemo and the Masters of Evil stormed the mansion. Tigra and Black Knight were injured severely, and Hercules was beaten so hard he went into a coma. And while they still were in for a hot minute, the Masters of Evil destroyed everybody's belongings, including the only photo left of Captain America's mother. That was a pretty sad page. Number 9, Secret Invasion. With Disney announcing all these new Marvel shows, we can start speculating where the plot might go. Like for example, Secret Invasion was announced, and now Emilia Clarke has signed on to do it, along with Samuel L. Jackson and Ben Mendelsohn, so it's clear some Skrulls are probably going to be in the picture. In the comics, Secret Invasion was an event that took place where Skrulls wanted to take over Earth. They thought it was rightfully theirs, so they're like, yeah, let's do this. So what better way to take over the world than to blend in like one of the greatest heroes on it? So after the Skrulls had experimented on the Illuminati, they put one Skrull secretly in every team in all of these states. So with Sharon Carter making some shady phone calls after she was pardoned in the final credits scene of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I'm betting that she's already secretly a Skrull.
Coming in at number 8, we have Miss Marvel, one of the most super powerful characters in the Marvel Universe. Following a similar space cop motif that Green Lantern uses, it would seem that very few people would be able to stand up to her. I mean, we all remember in Avengers Endgame when she took a headbutt from Thanos without even flinching, but that doesn't mean that she's impervious to any sort of harm, especially when we're talking about harm coming from Rogue. Miss Marvel and Rogue got into a one-on-one conflict that would change the two characters forever. In this clash, Rogue comes in contact with Miss Marvel and uses her vampiric power-draining abilities, but she wasn't nice about it. Rogue drained Miss Marvel until she sucked out every last ounce of super-powered energy that was inside of her, making Rogue insanely strong and leaving Miss Marvel not that marvelous. Next on the list, we got Superman. Some people would love to see Superman become less powerful just because it might make the character a little bit more interesting, but that's tough to do because so much of the DC universe has been built around his godlike presence. One way that this has been done tastefully was when the New 52 run of Superman introduced a new power. Superman could now perform what would be called a super flare. As many of you know, Superman gets his power from the sun. This solar energy builds up in his body like a smartphone battery charging. On a few occasions, when he comes out of contact with the sun for too long, he will lose his powers and all of his abilities. But with this super flare, he can unleash all that energy stored in his body in one blast like a massive nuke. However, when he does this, he will be without his powers for 24 hours as his body sucks in that good sunlight. Next on the list, we have Storm, one of the coolest comic book characters ever created. I've always been a fan of any hero who has storm powers because there is so much you can do with them. Got a fire? Bring in some rain. Got a big monster? Hit it with some lightning. Got a town that needs clean energy? Build a windmill and then create some wind. But in Uncanny X-Men issue 185, Storm would no longer be the queen of weather. This was because the future mutant Forge worked with Henry Peter Gyrich to come up with a weapon that could be used to neutralize a mutant's powers. See, Gyrich was a little bit peeved because Rogue had recently gotten into a major conflict with S.H.I.E.L.D. This led to Gyrich attempting to depower Rogue with this newly crafted weapon, but a misfire led to it hitting Storm. Right next on the list, we have Bruce Banner. Jason Aaron did one of my favorite runs of the Hulk. There was a short series where this time Hulk gets rid of Banner, not the other way around. The Hulk goes to see Dr. Doom, and Doom genetically grows a Banner clone and then surgically removes the section of Hulk's brain which contains Banner and implants it into this new clone. So now the two can coexist without each other. Hulk actually deals with this very well. He checks out the world and ignores everything that the previous superpowered world would bring to him, but it refuses to leave him alone. Banner eventually goes mad and starts making an island of superpowered Hulk beasts with an attempt to recreate the Hulk in his own body. A team of mad scientist hunters commission the Hulk to work with them to take out the newly insane Banner, and the two sides of the same coin go head on, and that's only in the first few issues. It gets way crazier down the road. Right after Hulk, we have Thor. The Asgardian has always had a lot of family problems. If he's not fighting with his brother, it's with his dad or his sister. On one occasion, Odin thought it was time to teach Thor a tough lesson. Because Thor is insanely powerful, he's always walked around as a brutish thug who wants to punch first and ask questions later. Odin thought it was time that he learned some empathy for those who aren't able to wield a hammer that was made out of a fallen star. So he stripped him of his power and then sent him to Earth. Now Thor might have walked around like an angry kid who wants to have cookies for breakfast, but Odin solved this problem by also wiping his memory. This way Thor would be forced to be a real person and see what it's like to feel and act like a normal person. Of course he eventually got his memory back and returned to the mantle of God of Thunder. Right after that we have Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange lost his powers in one of the coolest, dumbest ways possible. Earth was under attack from the Impericul, which are a futuristic robot race from another dimension. They hate magic and travel through time and space to destroy it in every form. The Impericul came to Earth to battle Doctor Strange, and Strange summoned up all the magic on Earth into his body in an attempt to destroy the Impericul leader, but this failed and left Strange in a weakened state with no magic left on the planet for him to use his powers. Coming in at number 2, we have Wonder Woman. Strength is a cornerstone of this character, and with the loss of her powers, it was shown that she can represent that in more ways than one. In the 70s, Wonder Woman willingly gave up her powers because she sought to follow her heart. If she was to stay the superpowered goddess, it would mean she would have to return to Themyscira and leave behind the heartthrob Steve Trevor. In her newly depowered state, she didn't give up her life of hero work. She went on to study a new martial art, probably making her even more powerful in the long run. I mean, if you can kick someone's butt while you're just regular flesh and blood, then when you pack some superpowered juice into that, you can start knocking people out like 19-year-old Mike Tyson. Part of the change to this character was to coincide with the women's movement that was happening in the 70s. DC Comics wanted to represent a strong female character that could be closer associated to the female readers that were picking up the comic. And for the number 1 spot, we have Wolverine. It would be pretty hard to be Wolverine without the powers. I mean, even take Superman. On a few occasions, he has been stripped of his powers, and he's still that Boy Scout at heart and will do what's right no matter what. But with Wolverine, a big part of his personality is being able to be punched in the face and come back like nothing happened, which probably made the loss of his powers even more interesting. Back in 2013, Wolverine was infected with a very advanced virus that attacked his healing factor. It basically made him so he was just a regular guy. Well, a regular guy that could probably still crank out 100 pull-ups. But this was so severe that he couldn't even use his claws anymore, so he had wrist-mounted claws. I guess you can take the powers out of the Wolverine, but you can't stop him from trying to slice people in half. Now, this level of aggression without the healing factor backing him up eventually led to his death.
Number 10, Green Arrow. Now, I'm sure we all know who Green Arrow is, so I won't dive too deep into his backstory, but I will give you a little taste just in case you're not super familiar. Now, Oliver Queen, aka Green Arrow, is a vigilante superhero who fights crime in his home of Star City, using archery, martial arts, and technology. Not to mention, by day, he is also a wealthy playboy and billionaire industrialist turned outspoken socially progressive politician. Honestly, just think Batman, but way less sad and with arrows. Needless to say, he is a good superhero, and unfortunately, he met an untimely end back in 1995. Here's how that story played out. The Russians planned on planting a bomb that releases a bacteria that would destroy millions of buildings in Metropolis, killing all of the people inside of them. The bomb works when 2 people put their hands on the detonator. While the bomb is in transit on a plane, for some reason Green Arrow put his arm on the detonator, knowing that if he removes his arm, the bomb would explode. Superman showed up and suggested that they would just cut off the appendage with his heat vision, but Oliver for some reason refused. In the end, the bomb went off and Green Arrow became, well, no more. Check it out for yourself in 1995's Green Arrow number 99 all the way to 101. Number 9, Rorschach's death. In the last issue of the original Watchmen limited series entitled A Strong and Loving World, we get a truly shocking reveal. Ozymandias was actually the bad guy all along. Turns out he was responsible for the death of thousands in New York, the death of the comedian, the accusations on Dr. Manhattan, and the framing of Moloch. Sure, that's shocking to say the least, but there's actually a lot more, as is what happens after that's truly shocking. Now, don't get me wrong, Ozymandias' intentions were good. He did all that he could to prevent a nuclear war between the Soviet Union and the US. But it was still an injustice for Rorschach, and he wanted to expose Ozymandias. Setting out to do so, Rorschach encounters Dr. Manhattan and tells him what's actually happening. Dr. Manhattan tried to stop Rorschach from exposing Ozymandias, but Rorschach responded by saying that Manhattan had to kill him to stop him. In a shocking turn of events, Dr. Manhattan actually did so and vaporized Rorschach and chose to believe in Ozymandias' cause instead of anything else. Now, if you haven't already read this limited series, I highly recommend that you go back and check it out, starting with 1986's Watchmen, number 1. Number 8, Sue Dibney's death. Now this sad death takes place during the Identity Crisis storyline, and it's actually what sets it all in motion. Now if you're not familiar with Identity Crisis, it's basically a love story wrapped inside a murder mystery, with a concerted effort to bring a real world crime and quote unquote darkness to all of the Justice League. Now it all starts with, like I said, the death of Sue Dibny, the elongated man's wife, and from there it just spirals into a story of lines being crossed by both supervillains and heroes. Addressing heavy topics like forced mind wiping, the story made some readers pretty uncomfortable to say the least, and when all was said and done, the family members of a few heroes were dead and the reputations of others were completely tarnished in brand new ways. It's eventually realized by Dr. Midnight, Mr. Terrific, and Batman, all separately I might say, that Sue was murdered using some pretty familiar technology. However, it wasn't done by someone that we would expect. Now if you don't want to hear this, I will say cover your ears, but honestly you probably already know this by now, the murderer was Jean Loring, the wife of the Atom who was committed to Arkham Asylum after she was discovered. Now there are definitely two viewings of Identity Crisis. One is a dark tragedy reflective of the real world that we all live in now, and one is a tenaciously destructive tentacle of the Watchmen squid monster, still sort of wriggling around 15 years later. But I've only seen the former, but if you do see the latter, let me know in the comments below. Now if you haven't read it and want to give it a go, check out 2004's Identity Crisis #1 all the way to 2005's Identity Crisis #7.
Number 7. Blue Beetle. During the events of Countdown to Infinite Crisis, Ted was tracking a signal from a bug. He followed it to Checkmate headquarters in Switzerland. Upon arriving, he finds files containing all the information of all Earth's superheroes. I'm talking their strengths, weaknesses, identities even. A lot of bad stuff. And then in comes Black King and, drumroll please, Maxwell Lord. The longtime ally had been planning to use Brother Eye and the Omax to kill all of Earth's metahumans. So once the files were deleted, Ted makes a run for it. Stopped by an OMAC and locked up, Maxwell comes in to deliver the final bullet to his head, right after he tells Maxwell to rot in hell, that is. Number 6. Darkseid. Yeah, you heard me. In the final Crisis event, Batman himself killed Darkseid. Now, of course, Batman had to break his only rule to do this, but I mean, come on guys, it's Darkseid we're talking about. We can make an exception. By the time issue 6 rolls around, the world is on the brink of destruction. So Batman decides he's going to use the exact same bullet Darkseid used to kill Orion. So Batman aims and fires it right at his shoulder. Darkseid panics and tries to switch bodies into Detective Dan Turpin, but Wonder Woman comes in, uses a lasso of truth, and releases Darkseid's consciousness from Turpin's body. And at the same time, Batman died. What an event, that's right, so at the same time that Batman shot Darkseid with that bullet, Darkseid used the Omega Beams and just straight up obliterates Batman. Batman ended up teleporting to prehistoric times, but we can't not include that in this list part of this moment. Number 5. Captain Atom. Taking place in the Kingdom Come miniseries, the world is in a future with our favorite superheroes much older. Basically out of touch with the times. So the new generation of superheroes are running free doing all the dirty work. Most of these offspring are children of past superheroes. Some of the new heroes, however, end up kind of being dicks. Yeah, they're becoming a threat, being irresponsible, and they're pretty dangerous. So Batman, being Batman, wanted to ensure a safe future and prevent a war between all of the supers. Not a bad idea, but a little too late. Captain Atom then lost a fight to Parasite. The end result, Captain Atom being ripped apart, causing a nuclear explosion that decimated the entire state of Kansas. Sorry, Kansas. Oops, my bad. Number 4, Martian Manhunter. Your kind will fail. Your kind will always fail. Those are some of the last words spoken by Martian Manhunter in Final Crisis 1, after he gets trapped in a prison. He had originally went there to be undercover as John Jones, and regularly reported back to Batman. Then the villains broke free and he was left behind. Ooh, not good. Human Flame had given the villain Libra instructions to kill Martian Manhunter. Don't do it! So Libra went and stabbed Martian Manhunter with a staff in front of the entire secret society of supervillains, or SS or SOV. Okay, some acronyms don't work, okay? So upon his death, he returned back to his Martian form, and in his final moments, he still managed to send a message back to the Justice League. What a trooper! They held his funeral on his home planet Mars, with Superman giving the eulogy. Can you do mine as well, Superman? My eulogy, please? In time, not now, just like when it happens. Thanks. His final moments were expanded on in the Final Crisis Requiem storyline, teaching us more about his homeworld and the inhabitants of it. Number 3, Wally West. Heroes in Crisis 9. So after visiting the sanctuary, trying to avoid another flashback scenario, past Wally West leans in to break future Wally West's neck. In order to close the timeline, one of the Wallys has to die, right? So then Blue Beetle, Batgirl, Harley, and Booster They all land and they're super confused seeing what's unfolding. Then they see Poison Ivy, who was presumed dead at the time. So future Wally knows how he feels, so he helps him up and reassures him that he's not alone. And as he himself was there just 5 days prior. Don't kill, don't run, just talk and listen. Pretty solid advice. He goes on to explain that if people could see that even the strongest of heroes are hurting inside, that they need to talk to people. Which is a pretty solid line. I feel like a lot of people reading this could use that advice in their own lives in some way. Booster suggests not killing Wally, but instead completing the loop. So by bringing back a speed clone from the 25th century, that way the old Flash can live on, and the young Flash does the loop over. Kinda like how Cap took the stones back in time to complete that loop. See, while Cap's still alive, he's kinda not because he's stuck in that loop, right? So he's gone, but he's not. But he's gone, but he's not. He's gone. The Heroes in Crisis storyline to take out Wally West went under fire. Like, I mean, what do you guys think? Were you a fan of how the deconstruction of Wally West came about? Let us know down below. Let's talk about it. Number 2, Connor Kent's death. Taking place in the Infinite Crisis storyline, Superboy is killed by Superboy Prime. What? So the other dimension Superboy Prime basically gets jealous and wants to take Superboy's spot in the Paradise dimension. He thinks he's more fitting. Yeah, okay pal, whatever you say. So Superboy Prime attacks him and kicks his ass. Backup arrives, that being the Teen Titans, Doom Patrol, and the Justice Society of America, but the next encounter ends much worse than the previous. Connor and Prime go at it, and eventually Superboy crashes them both into Alexander Luthor's multiverse tower, causing this massive explosion, stopping Alexander from destroying New Earth. Dying in the arms of Wonder Girl, Connor is told by Cassie that he saved the Earth. And in a glorious last line, he says, "I know, Cass, isn't it cool?" And then he dies just moments before the rest of the gang showed up. Superman mourning his death is actually just heartbreaking. And finally, number 1, Hal Jordan Parallax. Parallax entity is the sentient embodiment of fear, the symbol of fear, rather. So, once Hal Jordan becomes the Green Lantern after Abin Sur in Sector 2814, Sinestro made Parallax choose Hal Jordan to free itself from the central battery. Parallax spent many years influencing Hal over time, causing doubt and fear to flood his mind. Once the destruction of Coast City happened, that plus the central battery that Hal destroyed, the entity Parallax was able to latch itself onto Hal Jordan's soul. Not good. Hal's strong willpower made this plan take years to be complete, but once Cyborg Superman helped destroy Coast City, he could only hold on to that willpower for so long. Pushing through all of the anger and grief, Hal Jordan ended up sacrificing his own life to reignite the Earth's sun. Attaboy, Hal. This is actually a really sad moment, like.
Number 10, Phoenix Saga. Although now we just look back at the Phoenix Saga as being a part of history, at the time it was shocking. Jean Grey merged with the cosmic force that saved her from dying in outer space, attracting the presence we have come to know as the Phoenix Force. This Phoenix Force would later be revealed to now be a part of Jean, granting her great power. She became known as having the power of a god and then turned dark and became an insane supervillain, and then she died. And she had been one of the founding members of the X-Men. This was big stuff. Of course, Jean wouldn't stay dead, which would end up only shocking readers even more in the future when she did return. Especially as it meant that Cyclops would abandon his happy home life with Jean's clone, Madeline Pryor, who he had married and kinda also had a child with. Bad Scott Summers, bad Scott. Number 9, Death of Hulk. The difference between Jean's death during the Dark Phoenix Saga and that of Hulk's death during Civil War II is one felt at least like it was kinda coming from somewhere. We all knew that Bruce Banner at the time had been working to cure himself of his Hulk transformation. Amadeus Cho had ended up even trying to help his friend by trying to remove the gamma radiation from Bruce and take it into himself, turning him into the totally awesome Hulk, a more emotionally balanced version of the hero. Bruce Banner even gave Hawkeye a special Hulk-killing arrow in case he ever began to transform once more, and instructed that Hawkeye should kill him should that come to pass. However, we don't really learn about this until after Hawkeye has done the deed. Instead, a tense argument with Bruce is interrupted by his swift death. Of course, Bruce Banner and his Hulk would be back, but at the moment he died, readers were likely thinking, wait, did I just read that right? Did Bruce's companion and friend Clint Barton just kill him? And yes, he did. He did do that. Even he was shocked. Number 8, Death of Wolverine. The death of an unkillable and one of the most popular heroes? This one caught a lot of people off guard initially and likely helped to boost sales just from that title alone. Everyone wanted to know how Wolverine's story would end. Of course, once again, this is comics, so Wolverine's death would not end up being permanent. Because, yeah, he is one of the most popular characters, so obviously we're not gonna let him stay dead. In the end, it was adamantium that was Wolverine's undoing. The very thing that had made him so tough over the years also ended up killing him. Wolverine was without his healing factor after a microverse virus deactivated it, and learned that, well, there was also a bounty on his head. While other brilliant minds rushed to fix Wolverine's healing factor, Logan was resigned to his fate, not showing any desire for having it brought back. He tracked down the one responsible for the bounty on his head, and during the confrontation ended up rushing to save Weapon X test subjects and victims from having the deadly adamantium bonding process that he had actually gone through years before. Slashing the tanks of adamantium caused him to become covered in the liquid metal, which hardened and encased him, suffocating and killing him. What a way to go. But like I said, he would return. And with random burning hot claws to boot. Never forget that he has hot claws, though they never really come up. Number 7. Carnage. To be honest, Carnage has had a few shocking assumed deaths over the recent years. One of these happened during the events of Axis when Carnage's alignment was inverted. Carnage took on the mantle of your friendly neighborhood Carnage and set out to try and be a hero, which was already surprising and disturbing enough, especially considering that Cletus Cassidy was still psychopathic and still had violent urges and tendencies that he struggled against. One of the most surprising moments of Axis was when Carnage helped in the fight against the alignment reversed evil X-Men, who attempted to set off a gene bomb which would kill all humans in the vicinity. I feel like it was a big vicinity, but I'll let people in the comments argue how big that vicinity was. I think it was like all of New York. Spider-Man, who was still a hero, and Carnage were unable to defuse the bomb in time, and so Carnage chose to sacrifice himself, shapeshifting around it to absorb and prevent its blast radius. Of course, we assumed that Carnage had been killed during this noble act, but like most other times when we suspected Cletus dead, he just lost his legs and would later return to his evil ways. Man, how many legs has that guy had? A lot of legs. Number 6. Black Mask. Black Mask had crossed paths with Catwoman before, and he had even tortured her sister Maggie, but he likely never expected Selina to kill him because, well, she thought of herself a hero usually. However, the next time he moved to threaten her, kidnapping and torturing Slam Bradley, a Gotham detective and sometimes ally of Catwoman's, he realized he messed with Selina at the wrong time. The Black Mask ended up taking on Catwoman directly, thinking he had her cornered while he threatened pretty much everyone she loved. Of course, Black Mask was unaware that Catwoman was currently questioning her own alignment, having just discovered that she had been manipulated into becoming a hero by Zatanna. He was as surprised as we were when Catwoman decided to shoot him right in the head, killing him. She was like, am I a hero, am I a villain? Maybe I'm both. You can be both, I think. I think that's a thing. It's called an anti-hero. Number 5. Molecule Man. Owen Reese, aka Molecule Man, was a longtime villain until recently. After his involvement in God Emperor Doom's battle world, where he was basically kept as a prisoner and used as a power source by Dr. Doom, Reese agreed to help Mr. Fantastic rebuild the multiverse. Using Molecule Man's power, Reed Richards succeeded in doing so, returning the multiverse to the way it was meant to be and kind of improving it in some areas. Unfortunately, during their adventures together, the Future Foundation was set upon by a new villain known as the Griever at the End of All Things, who had her endlings devour Molecule Man's body. Because he had used parts of himself to anchor the multiverse, Molecule Man was no longer as infinite as he once had been, and randomly died at the hands of this new villain. Wow, what a way to go, especially considering he was such a cool villain. Oh well, RIP. Number 4. Joker. Death of the Family was another shocking DC story all around. I mean, it's another huge Joker plot, and shocking is something we've come to expect from Batman's arch nemesis. If you expect it, can it still be shocking? I think so. Joker is one of those villains who almost always gets away. After all, Joker is the most iconic villain and is so popular, it would be truly shocking if DC did something like, I don't know, kill him off? Well, at the end of Death of the Family, that is just what appears to happen. Joker plummets to his death off an underground cliff. And while we all know falling into a pit does not equal death, all nerds should know this, he was presumed dead and would remain so until the events of Endgame in 2017. DC's Endgame, not Marvel's Endgame. Just FYI. Endgame took place, by the way, almost a full 2 years after he went missing at the end of Death of the Family. Of course, in Endgame, it would be revealed that Joker was fully restored via a pool of Dionysium found at the bottom of a cliff, and that he'd been laying low disguised as Arkham Asylum orderly Eric Border. But we wouldn't know that till later. Number 3. Darkseid. During the Darkseid War, we saw one of the strongest supervillains, Darkseid, defeated. Pretty impressive. It took a lot, but when the Flash merged with the Black Racer, in addition to exposure to the anti-life equation, Darkseid was finally defeated, and not just defeated, killed. This form of Darkseid would seemingly be gone forever, but in its place we did get a new Darkseid following these events. The baby of Earth 3's villainous Lois Lane, aka Superwoman, and Alexander Luthor, was taken in by Darkseid's daughter, Grail, to be raised as the new Darkseid imbued with Darkseid's essence. Little essence of Darkseid in there. Now you got a new Darkseid baby. Also, it's super weird that Darkseid is raised by his daughter, but whatever. That's weird. Still weirds me out. Number 2. Poison Ivy. Heroes in Crisis gave us multiple shocking deaths, but one such death was shocking not only because it was the death of a major character, but because it completely revamped that character's design and later on led to a different path. Poison Ivy was one of those reported dead in the event at the Sanctuary, and had currently been on a heroic path at the time. She was soon after resurrected using a rose she'd given Harley Quinn by Wally West himself, who actually turned out was responsible for her death. But this time around, she looked completely different when she came back, so both her death and her resurrection were pretty surprising, and this all happened in one story, one event. Number 1. Thanos. Recently, Thanos was killed off randomly in issue 6 of the 2019 Guardians of the Galaxy series. Of course, with Thanos, we know that no death will likely ever be finite for the big guy. But still, the fact that his death wasn't part of some massive event was pretty surprising and shocking. Like, if you weren't reading Guardians of the Galaxy, you might even have not known that this happened. Of course, his final death came hot on the heels of what we thought was already his final death. Gamora had killed him previously in Thanos Legacy issue number 1, even going so far as to behead the Mad Titan, but his lady love at the time, Hela, working with the Black Order, sought to resurrect Thanos. Yeah, Hela and Thanos' relationship is kind of random and sort of emerged from a villainous working relationship originally, though I guess it also makes sense somewhat as Hela is the Asgardian goddess of death, and that's usually something, Thanos is into. It's all about death. Thanos was resurrected, but the process was interrupted, meaning that not all of Thanos' mind had returned to him. In the end, Hela and Thanos ended up sucked into a black hole, so it's also likely that we could see them both again somewhere in the near future, but I feel like usually most people that go into a black hole in real life, you're probably dead. Number 10. Mysterio. All the events surrounding Mysterio's death were pretty nuts. Mysterio took his own life following his failed attempt to corrupt Daredevil. The whole Daredevil plot was also pretty nuts. One, because it was all quite involved as Mysterio tried to ruin Daredevil's life. Poor Matt. Everyone is always trying to ruin his life and mess with his head, and really, the dude has enough problems as is just dealing with past traumas. And 2, Mysterio jumping into a Daredevil story was just something very different, as Mysterio is pretty much exclusively a Spider-Man villain. At the time, Mysterio had already been dying of cancer, and so when his plot failed, he decided his time was done. What was also pretty neat was all the uncertainty surrounding his death. This being Mysterio, many fans were skeptical that he was even dead, with some believing that he'd faked his death. Number 9. Spook. So I was talking with some of the other staff here at Top 10 Nerd, and apparently I'm the only one who is shocked by the passing of the Spook. So if there are other Spook fans out there, please make yourself known in the comments. Help me prove that I'm not the only Spook fan, unless I am. Boy, that would be embarrassing. More for Spook though, I think, than for me. For those who are less familiar with this Spook, he is a Batman villain known for being a master escape artist and for his hypnosis skills. The Spook was known for helping other criminals to escape from prison for a price. He actually helped build Gotham's maximum security prison and would find himself in prison there multiple times after being caught by Batman. Spook is a villain who has been around since the 1970s, and while he's appeared in under 50 issues, it's still always shocking to me when one of the original and older rogues passes away, because it's likely they won't be returning. Such was the case with Spook, who actually had been thought dead much earlier in his criminal career and returned 10 years later, but this time around in issue 657 of Batman, Damian Wayne killed him, taking his head as proof of the deed. Not something one usually comes back from, even if it has been. It's been over 10 years now as well in real life, so I don't think he's coming back. Number 8. Mr. Sinister. During the Messiah Complex storyline, Mr. Sinister was killed both memorably but also somewhat surprisingly. He was betrayed by Mystique, okay, maybe that part of it wasn't super surprising. Who used a comatose and dying rogue as a weapon? Now that's kinda surprising. Taking the new mutant Messiah baby, later known as Baby Hope, for herself, and using Rogue's touch to kill Sinister. Not only was this death shocking, but it would help to pave the way for all of Sinister's clones to come.
Number 7. Cyclops, Avengers vs. X-Men. First of all, I have to get this out of the way. Man, do I love talking about the Avengers vs. X-Men storyline. The Phoenix Force is heading towards Earth, and the Avengers, obviously fearing the almighty entity, made Iron Man and Giant Man prepare a disruptor weapon to kill the Phoenix Force. Instead of killing it though, the blast alters the entity and divides it into 5 fragments that forcefully bond with 5 X-Men. Namor, Magic, Colossus, Emma Frost, and of course, their leader Cyclops. While the heroes tried to use this awesome power gallantly and responsibly, they ended up leaving quite a bit of damage behind them. Possessed by the Phoenix, Cyclops killed Professor Xavier and led many attacks against humans and mutants alike. Afterwards, he did adopt a more of a revolutionary attitude, leading a rebellious team of X-Men and coming into conflict with other superheroes and his former friend Wolverine on more than one occasion. Because of all this, Cyclops was briefly viewed as a martyr, believed to have been killed by Black Bolt in Death of X before it was revealed he had just succumbed to Mpox just days before. Number 6. Aquaman, Throne of Atlantis. Aquaman has always been a bit torn, being a hero from 2 worlds and all. While he was Atlantean royalty, his primary concern is always the fate of his world's oceans. However, he still has this sense of responsibility towards the surface world of his father, and this really came to play in the Throne of Atlantis storyline. Aquaman finds himself at a crossroads with his brother's determination to start a war between Atlantis and the surface after malfunctioning Navy missiles hit Atlantis. He realizes, much to the surprise of his teammates, that the Atlanteans were utilizing a strategy he had devised in case the 2 powers ever went to war. Despite his close relationship with his fellow heroes, he refused to stand with the Justice League against the Atlanteans and ultimately staged a brutal offense against the Justice League in the battles that followed, forsaking his old team for his homeland. To add even more insult to injury, the League eventually discovered that Aquaman's longtime pal Nuidas Vulko was behind the whole thing. He orchestrated for Atlantis to be bombed specifically to incite a war. Now, what was the end goal, you might ask? It was for the League to defeat Ocean Master, which would then lead to the reinstatement of Arthur as their king. Number 5. Wolverine, Old Man Logan. Now, if there's one member of the X-Men that you can truly trust, it's definitely Wolverine. He is surprisingly loyal and dictated by a code of honor. Still though, that doesn't stop a betrayal or two from happening every now and then, though it wasn't necessarily his own fault. In the Wolverine Old Man Logan storyline, we get to see the vicious side of Wolverine that we've all come to know and love. However, like I said, it wasn't really his fault. So basically, it's the future and Logan is an old man, and he hasn't used the Wolverine persona or his claws since this mysterious night in the past when the villains supposedly attacked. We learned through some flashbacks that a massive group of 40 supervillains attacked the X-Men mansion, and during this attack, Wolverine gets in touch with his primal side and grows crazy and just kills every single one of them. After the fight and the intense slaughter, things change and Wolverine realizes that this was all just an illusion. The entire time, Wolverine had his vision and mind altered by Mysterio, and all the villains that he killed in combat were actually his fellow X-Men. This destroyed Logan, and he decided to retire his Wolverine mantle for good after that, essentially killing that part of him so he would never do something like that again. It's definitely a sad way to end a run as a hero, but I can see why he felt that was necessary, and as much as I hate to say it, this was a huge betrayal and definitely a shocking one at that. Number 4. Green Lantern, Emerald Twilight. In 1994, DC decided that it was finally time for Hal Jordan to step down from the Green Lantern mantle so that it could be passed on to someone else. So how did DC decide to end the career of one of their most beloved heroes? Well, they couldn't just do it quietly. Of course, they had to turn him into a villain of some sorts, undoing pretty much all of the good he's ever done. In the Reign of Superman storyline, which took place after the Death of Superman storyline, Hal's home of Coast City was completely destroyed by the villains Mongol and Cyborg Superman. As a result, the city was demolished and its 7 million citizens were killed. This turn of events made Hal completely lose it, and he believed that if he could steal all of the main power battery's energy, the source of the Green Lantern ring's power, he could permanently rebuild Coast City. To do so, he killed all of the remaining Green Lantern Corps and the villain Sinestro, which unfortunately led him to becoming the villain Parallax, who even to this day looms over Hal. Hal did eventually redeem himself by sacrificing his life to restart the sun during the Final Night storyline, and also by revealing that his madness had just been caused by him being possessed by that fear entity. Hal would later go on to reform the Green Lantern Corps thanks to the expert guidance of Jeff Johns. Now, all things considered, this is a huge betrayal and a bit of a tough one to overlook, making it remain a black spot on DC's legacy. Check out this insane storyline for yourself in 1994's Green Lantern Volume 3, number 48 to number 50. Number 3. Terra, the Judas Contract. Now, if I'm being honest, there is probably no betrayal more famous than that of Terra Markov's. Debuting in New Teen Titans number 26, Terra Markov was a young, precocious girl who joined the team. It was learned later that Terra infiltrated the team at the behest of Deathstroke, dismantling the team from the inside. Throughout the 4-part storyline, Terra gives Terminator all of the information he needs in order to take down the Titans one by one, and he does so starting with Corey and Donna Troy, slowly making his way through all of them until he got to Dick Grayson, who was able to elude him. Realizing that he can never truly retire from superheroing, Dick adopts a new costume and identity and calls himself Nightwing, while Joey is also ready to follow him into battle as Jericho. Adeline then gives the heroes the location of the Hive Command Center, and Nightwing and Jericho go to the Hive base nestled in the Rocky Mountains, sneaking into the facility and discovering that the Teen Titans have been strapped to a giant machine which is slowly siphoning away all of their life energy. Nightwing and Jericho fight through a horde of Hive shock troops, but are eventually captured. Using the Terminator's body and weaponry, Jericho frees the other Titans and begins fighting the Hive, and Terra is enraged at Terminator and feels that his affection of Joey makes him look weak. She completely loses control of her sanity and yearns for nothing more than the death of everyone in the room. Changeling refuses to believe that Terra has gone bad and is certain that the Terminator has just brainwashed her. Terra's powers rage out of control until she finally causes a mountain of earth and debris to collapse down from the ceiling, unfortunately killing her in the process. Number 2. Batman Tower of Babel. Easily one of the most trusted but not the most trusting heroes around, it should really come as no surprise that Batman had secret files outlining the ways to take down his teammates just in case, right? Well, apparently it was pretty shocking for the other members of the Justice League during the Tower of Babel storyline. It's an insane level of preparation, like Batman prepared for some truly brutal plans, including blinding Green Lantern and turning Superman's skin invisible so that he'd go insane from yellow sun overexposure. It was revealed in JLA Tower of Babel that these files were stolen by Ra's al Ghul and used to orchestrate a debilitatingly effective attack on the individual members of the JLA. When Batman comes clean with how the villain was able to pinpoint their various weaknesses, half of his teammates vote for him to be booted out of the group. However, he ends up leaving on his own accord, but his friendship with the other members was deeply damaged, and even to this day, it remains a bit of a problem. Even in the New 52 universe, such plans still existed, and Batman came clean about it, but thankfully this time Superman was able to convince the League not to hold it against him. Number 1. Captain America: Secret Empire. I feel like we all knew this one was coming, like, come on, this was definitely the most shocking betrayal in recent comic history. After the Red Skull messed with and manipulated Kobik, a sentient cosmic cube, Steve Rogers revealed himself to be a Hydra defector, but more specifically, he was a Hydra sleeper agent who happened to be a twisted version of Cap that secretly took his place. Allying himself with a new Madam Hydra, Rogers took advantage of a global catastrophe to seize control of the world's government. Once in power, Hydra just made its move. S.H.I.E.L.D., infiltrated by Hydra thoroughly, began assuming control of key locations and executing any who stand in its way. I'll let you all check out the storyline for yourself because it is a great one, but I will tell you that our good Cap comes out on top in the end, defeating his evil doppelganger in a head-to-head battle. A few weeks later, and after a ton of hard work, the United States was thankfully turned back to normal.
Number 10. Silver Samurai. The Silver Samurai and Wolverine have an epic fight with one another in Uncanny X-Men issue 173. Kenichio Harada and Logan have a ton of history, and despite fighting one another a bunch, the two also share a mutual respect for one another. Their fight lasts 3 honestly beautiful pages. Despite Silver Samurai's ability to charge his sword using tachyon energy, making it strong enough to cut through almost anything, his sword remains no match for Wolverine's adamantium claws. Logan ends up victorious after he breaks Harada's arm, forcing the Silver Samurai to be at his mercy. In fact, he would have been killed if not for the interference of Mariko, the Silver Samurai's half-sister, and later, Viper. Number 9. The Mongrels. While we may have talked about Wolverine's famous son, Daken, on the first part of this list, we have yet to highlight how brutally Wolverine beat 5 of his other kids, who were actually originally rounded up by Daken himself. Initially. The Mongrels consist of Sophist, Shadowstalker, Cannonfoot, Fire Knives, and are led by Gunhawk. Wow, those are some names. Cannonfoot is the only one that is actually confirmed a mutant, but I feel like we simply didn't get enough time with the other members of the Mongrels to really learn what their mutant powers were, but I'm sure they had them. One can assume their power sets would at least be somewhat similar to Logan's, had we actually gotten into that. Of course, pitting the Mongrels against their father was all part of a master plan to get back at Wolverine and basically torture him. In fact, they were expected to die. A plan that was executed and orchestrated by Daken and likely the right hand. Logan killed the group of mutants without knowing that they were actually his own children, and I don't think we really even knew if they knew that he was their dad. Wolverine finds out after his connection to the Mongrels, and despite the fact that they were the ones who attacked him, Wolverine ends up feeling pretty guilty about it. Number 8. Morlocks. So later on we find out that Sabretooth actually may have been involved in the Mutant Massacre more than we otherwise thought. Flashbacks later on in the comics reveal that Sabretooth was there during the bloodshed, happily tearing unnamed Morlocks to shreds. Yeesh. And sure, like Caliban, most Morlocks may not be known for their strength, but there is power in numbers. The Marauders were a handful of mutants who ended up being capable of obliterating hundreds and hundreds of Morlock mutants in the tunnels. And Sabretooth apparently had some more direct involvement than we originally knew when it came to this genocidal attack. So maybe he was there, maybe he wasn't. Depends on which issue you've read as to what they've dived into of the Mutant Massacre. It's kind of retconned as being more, I think, there for it later. Number 7, Bolt. Bolt pops up as Chris Bradley in the film Wolverine X-Men Origins. His character ends up suspected dead following a run-in with Victor Creed in the film. His powers were then harvested and used to help build the film's terrifying, in so many ways, version of Deadpool, aka Weapon 11. This version of Deadpool also later gets taken out by both Wolverine and Creed when the two half-brothers, in this story, that story they were half-brothers, team up to defeat him, with Victor distracting Wade just long enough for Logan to come in and decapitate him. Although, of course, he wasn't dead. Number 6, Mentalo. Back when Sabretooth was a good guy and was a leader of the rebranded X-Force team known as Weapon X at the time, he and his team ended up taking on Mentalo. Unfortunately for them, it looked like Mentalo would actually win this fight and end up being successful in bringing back Stryker, who the team was aiming to kind of keep dead. Seeing there was no other way, Victor sacrificed himself, giving in to his baser animal instincts and losing his mind and moral compass in a berserker rage. Mentalo was caught off guard and forced to kill Victor, but this opened him up to attack from other members of the team, which ultimately led to his downfall. So although Victor did not deal the fatal blow in this fight, without his actions, Mentalo would definitely have not been defeated. So I'm going to count this as a victory for him. Also, it's his team, so I think we got to give him some credit. Number 5, John Wraith. John Wraith was killed by Victor in the film Wolverine X-Men Origins, where he is played by Will.i.am. I don't know if you forgot about that, but that's a little fact for you. In the film, Victor snaps his spine, mining his DNA for Stryker to use, and in the comics, he met his end through another animalistic foe, Helverine, the demonic possessed and soulless version of Wolverine who roams the earth wreaking havoc while Wolverine is busy in hell. In both universes, though, John Wraith is known as a powerful teleporter, which makes it impressive that Victor Creed managed to defeat him in Wolverine's Origins by anticipating where Wraith would teleport to and moving faster than John himself could actually teleport. I mean, if you grab someone's spine, they can't really teleport away from that. But you gotta be fast. Number 4, Angel. In the Ultimate Universe, Sabretooth brutally kills Angel. He cracks his skull open. Yeah. Those poor, oh so poor hollow bones. And he also smashes his face later on the ground after leaping on top of him in the Ultimatum storyline. Sabretooth then goes on to brutally brag about taking out an angel and says he'll likely go to hell for this. I mean, he'll likely go to hell for a lot of things, I think, at that point. He even goes so far to tear off one of Angel's wings as he's bleeding out. Fortunately, Hawkeye manages to get some revenge for the fallen hero, shooting Sabretooth right in the eye with an arrow in Ultimatum number 4. Of course, Sabretooth is just like, ow, because he can kind of regenerate, but, you know, still, something. Number 3, Gambit. In Uncanny X-Men, it is revealed that Gambit was actually part of the plot to take out the Morlocks during the events of the Mutant Massacre, but was forced to do so because of a pact with Mr. Sinister. In the end, Gambit actually refuses to take part in the massacre after helping the Marauders to get to the Morlocks' hideout. It's Sabretooth who reprimands him for being unable to follow through, apparently beating Gambit until he was on the brink of death, which we find out in issue 350 during a flashback seen through the eyes of Rogue, who had just kissed Gambit. So, you know, she's like having his memories and she's like, oh my goodness. Gambit only managed to save a young Marrow as well as just barely saving himself. Number 2, Psylocke. When you usually think of strong villains, you tend to think that their weakness normally lies within the realm of psionic heroes or mutants. But with Sabretooth, although Jean has handily disabled him in an instant, he isn't completely helpless when it comes to those with psionic abilities. When he finds his way into the X-Mansion in issue 213 of Uncanny X-Men, one of the mutants that he runs into is Psylocke, and while he doesn't full-on defeat her as Storm and Wolverine come to her rescue, Sabretooth gets pretty close to ripping her throat out. Apparently his psychic defenses are strong enough to block her psi bolts, and she is only able to probe his mind while he's distracted by fighting Wolverine. Also, for some reason, a lot of people count this as a victory for Psylocke, but without her fellow X-Men coming to her defense, I don't see how she actually would be able to take Sabretooth alone. So I don't know why we consider that a win for her. Number 1, Wolverine. Yeah, you guessed it, you knew he was going to be on here. Sabretooth has brutally beaten Wolverine on numerous occasions. He literally does it every year on Wolverine's birthday. Wolverine himself has even suggested in his own comic book commentary bubbles that he believes Victor is actually more powerful than him. The difference between these two characters is where Victor seems to hold the upper hand a lot of the times. Sabretooth as a villain often has no problem with kicking a man when he's down. He's sadistic and gives into the cruelty of his animal nature. Wolverine sometimes fights to hold back giving into his berserker rage, whereas Sabretooth's berserker rage seems to be kind of a permanent state of being for him. In the end, it's often Victor's bloodlust and ruthlessness that leave him coming out on top. At least when the two of those guys are fighting. Against other people, not always. Number 10, Caliban. During the Mutant Massacre, Sabretooth may have not been with the Marauders, massacring as many Morlocks as possible, but he shows up in X-Factor in a different part of the tunnels going after Caliban. The X-Men show up and think that they've disabled him, running to help the Morlocks from being brutally slaughtered. But Sabretooth was only pretending to be KO'd. He comes to and proceeds to continue to go after and threaten Caliban. Number 9, Deadpool. This fight happened in the 2016 run of Deadpool issue number 9. These two end up fighting because Wade thinks that Victor was actually responsible for killing his parents, even though he himself was the one responsible for killing his parents. He was sent to kill them to test his loyalty after his mind had been wiped so much he didn't really remember they were his parents. He set their house on fire. It's a really sad issue. Anyways, with both characters having strong regenerative healing factors, it could have been anyone's fight. But in the end, Sabretooth pushes Deadpool out into the road where he is hit by a car, and he decides to give up on the fight, urging the family in the car to just keep driving with him on the hood. And yeah, I know, Deadpool is a mutate, but I'm bumping him up to an honorary mutant just for the purpose of this list. Also, for someone who is so badass, Wade loses like a lot of fights, even within his own series. So like 50%, maybe not 50%, but at least 40% of the fights in his series, he's losing. Number 8, North Star. When Wolverine found himself being brainwashed and basically mind-controlled by the Hand, he was sent on a mission to prove himself by eliminating Kitty Pryde. While attempting to pounce on her, claws drawn, Kitty phased, causing Logan to go through her, and his claws thereby to go through the mutant behind her, North Star. Ouch, poor Jean-Paul. He got beaten just being a bystander. He wasn't even a target in this one. You know it's impressive when Logan can take out a pretty powerful mutant just by accidentally taking them out. Number 7, John Howlett Jr. John is Wolverine's brother in an alternate universe and comes from the series Wolverine: The End, which takes place on Earth 4011. His power set is similar to his brother James Howlett and includes a regenerative healing factor. He is known by the aliases Kitsunebi, White Ghost, and X. Wolverine was forced to fight John when it was revealed that he had a plot to take over Las Vegas. Both were relatively old at this point, and following an electric explosion during a fight, Wolverine accidentally stabbed John through the chest, fatally wounding him. John's healing factor was too slow and worn down at this point to allow him to regenerate his organs in time. John forgave Wolverine as he lay dying and confessed that he was glad that it had ended this way, and he was actually really proud of his brother. Aww. Sad. I love when people are in the middle of a fight and then they reconcile everything as they're dying. This all could have been resolved if you had a conversation about how much you loved each other. Number 6, the Vaporizer. In the Ultimate Universe, Wolverine was sent to take out a nameless teenage mutant who has the power to vaporize any living tissue in his vicinity in issue number 41 of Ultimate X-Men. This mutant's powers were so powerful and uncontrollable that the boy found himself vaporizing a whole town of people without even completely realizing that he was doing it. He killed over 250 people by accident. Wolverine finds him hiding in a cave and has a talk with him about the risk that he poses to both humans and mutants alike. This mutant doesn't just lose to Wolverine, he surrenders. Despite how powerful the young boy was, this non-battle proved that sometimes all one needs to defeat an enemy is a 6-pack of beer and a brutally honest conversation. Number 5. Mystique. While Mystique might not be strong in the traditional sense, she is a very powerful mutant. Her shapeshifting abilities allow her to pull off all kinds of tricks, both in and out of combat, and she is insanely wily as a result. Wolverine was sent to track Mystique down and take her out by Cyclops. In issue 65 of Wolverine Volume 3, we see these two have a final showdown in the desert. Mystique actually manages to put up a pretty good fight in this comic, using guns and grenades to hold Wolverine at bay, but eventually she succumbs to too many stab wounds during their fight. Wolverine, of course, just eventually heals himself. Despite defeating her and leaving Mystique weak enough that it would be possible for Wolverine to just take Raven out right there, he chooses to leave her bleeding out in the desert with a loaded gun, claiming that she knows what it's for. Ooh, that is dark. He's like, I'm not like you can use this gun. And I'm like, Wolverine, you kill people all the time, dude. What you talking about? You got some similarities there, I think. Number 4, the Hellfire Club. The Hellfire Club is basically one of the big bads of the X-Men world. They are an organization of criminal and mutant masterminds who aim to weigh the scales in the mutants' favor when it comes to world domination. That's right, they want to take over the world like most mutant bad guys do. They also dress like they're from Victorian England because, well, I guess they can. But despite their appearances, they still have some fairly strong members and a bunch of minions loyal to them. So don't think that just because they look ridiculous in their Victorian England dress that they are ridiculous, because they're not. But despite having an army of loyal members, this wasn't enough to stop Wolverine. In Uncanny X-Men issue 133, Wolverine takes down their entire brigade, all on his own, in an attempt to save the rest of the X-Men, who found themselves captured by them. Embarrassingly for Cyclops, while Wolverine takes on pretty much the entire Hellfire Club's army of minions, Scott struggles to take on Mastermind by himself in a fight on the astral plane. Wow. Keep up here, bub. Number 3, Cyclops. I know what you're thinking, so wait a minute, Amanda, doesn't Cyclops usually beat Wolverine? Well, you're right, he usually does beat Wolverine. However, there have been a few occasions where Wolverine has come out on top. One, in the 90s animated cartoon, there is a scene where Wolverine fights Cyclops, except it isn't really Cyclops, it ends up just being a robot, as Cyclops at the time is getting married to Jean Grey. However, Wolverine does best this simulation of Cyclops, which is pretty impressive, even though it's just a simulation. And number 2, there is a time when Wolverine comes very, very close to basically killing Cyclops, in my opinion, and that would be in X-Men Schism. At the end of X-Men Schism number 4, we actually see that Wolverine is just about to finish off Cyclops, claws drawn, about to smash him right in the face with those claws. We pick up on X-Men Schism number 5, and the two continue to fight. It seems that Cyclops is basically blasting Wolverine down to bones, but the cool thing about this is that Wolverine is still intact. Although he doesn't have a lot of flesh on him, he's still actually able to fight Scott. And he actually probably would have finished them if it wasn't for Hope coming in and defending them from the Sentinel that's about to basically, well, kill both of them at that point. Still, if they'd continued, I'm telling you, those claws would have gone right into Cyclops' eyes, right into his head, and he'd be dead. Number 2, Gorgon. These two faced off in Wolverine Volume 3, Issue 31 during the Enemy of the State story arc. Gorgon is known for being a fearsome villain who can, as his codename implies, turn enemies to stone with one simple glance. In fact, Gorgon has actually successfully killed Wolverine before. That's just how even of a match he and Wolverine are. He then had Wolverine resurrected and brainwashed him so that he might use him as his own assassin, turning him against his friends and colleagues in the hero community. In the end, though, Wolverine got him back, and he got him back good. During their fight in issue 31, Wolverine seems to take a page out of Perseus's book. He defeats Gorgon using his own claws to reflect his own gaze back unto himself, turning Gorgon into stone before shattering him into a million pieces. Number 1, X-24. We gotta occasionally go cinematic when talking about Wolverine. And though we've already talked about Wolverine versus Wolverine on the part 1 of this list, that was an alternate version of Wolverine himself in the comics. And this is a clone, younger, more durable version of him from the same universe in the film Logan. Jeez, I love this film. If you have time to rewatch this film, go do it, it's so good. Wolverine takes on X-24 more than once in the film, and although he has help in defeating him, regardless, it's still a fight worth mentioning, as X-24 was stated by Hugh Jackman to be like Wolverine, but in a permanent berserker rage, which is terrifying. That's like an unstoppable version of Wolverine, but he stopped it. It's also impressive to see an old and rundown Logan even manage to take on X-24, even with the assistance of Laura, aka X-23, and her friends. And sure, Logan himself died in the end, but really only at the cost of helping to actually take out X-24.
Number 10, Stephanie Brown. So after months of training from Batman, Stephanie Brown served as Robin during patrols. Nice, not a bad gig at all. Things were going well with the duo, you know, fighting crime, taking ass, kicking names, until she was captured by Mr. Zsasz and she resorted to using lethal force against him. That's a big no in Batman's eyes, so he fired her. Not even a write-up? Come on, dude. Even though she was saving his life? I mean, no? Alright. So her next step was to steal some plans and attempt to regain Batman's trust by going after Gotham's criminal underworld. Sneaky sneaky. This didn't go as planned and a city-wide war erupted. Oof! Yikes. It wasn't long before Stephanie was captured by Black Mask. She was then tortured in order to spill the beans on Batman. So after a harrowing escape, she makes her way to Leslie Tompkins' clinic, in rough shape of course, and her injuries were too much to recover from, and Stephanie Brown died with the Caped Crusader by her side. How lovely and also how tragic. Number 9, Black Mask. Yeah, I figured this would be a suitable place for this one. Making his first appearance in 1985 back in Batman issue 386, Black Mask, also known as Roman Sionis, met his demise in Catwoman Volume 3, issue 52. See, this is why you don't threaten the people that are close to Catwoman, because after breaking out of jail yet again, Deathstroke offers Black Mask a spot in the society, to which he accepts. I'd probably accept too, that sounds like a pretty cool society. Any society's cool in that book. All the while Red Hood is dismantling Black Mask's control over the crime going on in the city. Black Mask, being Black Mask, decides to keep running his mouth and threatens the people closest to Catwoman. So what does she do? Shoots him in the jaw, killing him in the process. Wrong move, bucko. I really enjoyed how they killed him off in Birds of Prey. I was kind of hoping it'd be similar to this, but being blown up, I'm fine with that. That works like a charm as well. Number 8, Guy Gardner. Taking place in a prequel to the Injustice Gods Among Us storyline, we find Superman as the leader of Earth. Makes sense? Look at him. I mean, all those powers. Of course. Using his powers to brutally enforce peace, Green Lantern, aka Guy Gardner, wasn't really a fan of his whole concept. Good Guy Gardner. He was also onto something after all, because Guy eventually discovered that Superman had been an ally to the Sinestro Corps. Traitor. So he goes and gathers his own army, the Green Lantern Corps. Hal Jordan actually took Superman's side here, but that's only because he originally thought that Guy had killed John Stewart, which in fact Sinestro actually did. Got a little, quite the triangle we got here, boys. Hal ended up tearing off Guy Gardner's arm, Bucky Barnes style, before leaving him for death. Not a good way to go.
Number 7, She-Hulk defends Star Fox. She-Hulk has always been a huge defender of superheroes. After all, she is one herself. But everyone was still caught somewhat off guard when she signed up to defend Star Fox, aka Eros, Thanos' brother. Eros had been an Avenger and a hero, but was being charged with assaulting and manipulating others using his pheromone powers of seduction. Some Avengers stood beside him, and some preferred to keep their names out of the headlines, while others still denounced him. But She-Hulk decided to defend him in court. What was more shocking to Jennifer was when she discovered that although he had not manipulated her into sleeping with him, Star Fox had manipulated her and John Jonah Jameson, aka Man-Wolf, into marrying one another, believing it was best for both of them. Still, She-Hulk would be forced to defend him in a more cosmic court of law later on, and would of course move to divorce Man-Wolf, believing their relationship to be a complete sham. Which kinda sounds like it was. Seemed like they were about to break up when he made them fall in love with each other. Number 6. Dr. Doom becomes Iron Man. Following the events of Doom's Battleworld, Doom realized that not even becoming a god had made him feel any sense of accomplishment. Feeling empty inside, Doom reflected perhaps it was his approach that had always been off, and decided to set off on a path of redemption, attempting to become one of the good guys. As a symbol of turning over a new leaf, he shed his armor and became an ally of Tony Stark, a man he'd always secretly admired. When Tony was left in a coma following the events of the Second Civil War, Doom surprised readers, shocking all of us Doom fans in a good way by becoming infamous Iron Man. As Iron Man, Doom was a force to be reckoned with and one all villains seemed terrified of, and for good reason. Having Doom as a rival villain was hard enough, but having him as a hero meant that they would need to come together just to defend themselves against his might. And even then, these villains failed. Doom single-handedly took them out during a meeting where they'd all gathered to discuss the problem of Doom himself. Number 5. Death of Spider-Man. I'm not sure what was more shocking, when Spider-Man died the first time in Ultimates and had to immediately be resurrected because the timing had not been properly communicated, or when he died the second time with all the grandiose surrounding his death. The Ultimate Universe of 1610 was full of shocking moments, Spider-Man's death among them. In reality, the creatives wanted Spider-Man dead because they felt he was too similar to his 616 counterpart, and they were trying to get rid of all the characters who they felt were just too similar to the main continuity versions. Still, the Death of Spider-Man made for a shocking title, even if it was in an alternate universe, as Peter Parker's Spider-Man was still considered the darling of Marvel, no matter which reality you're talking about. Number 4. Black Widow betrays Iron Man. Another Ultimate story that shocked many fans was the whole relationship and then subsequent betrayal between fellow Avengers Iron Man and Black Widow. On Earth 1610, these two were about to get married when Black Widow revealed her true colors. In this reality, she was a double agent and killed Jarvis before Tony could even stop her. Fortunately, he still had override systems in place on the nanobots he'd given Natasha, which helped her to control the armor he'd gifted her as an engagement gift. He used these nanobots to knock Natasha out, and when she came to the hospital, Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye, arrived to take her out with an arrow to the head. In betraying her teammate, she'd also gotten Clint's family, which he had in Ultimates, killed, so he was out for revenge on multiple levels. Number 3. Iron Man, evil all along. Dun dun dun. The Crossing was a super out there storyline, one where it was revealed that Tony Stark had actually been a sleeper agent all along for Kang the Conqueror, who we later learned wasn't even really Kang but was a Mortis in disguise. Oh, comics. Tony went around being a huge villain for a while until he lay dying, inspired by his younger self to reform before he passed away. His younger self had been brought to the present by the Avengers to stop their version of Tony. Yeah, it was a time. I hope the Avengers learned that bringing a younger, less experienced Tony to defeat an older version who is a more accomplished genius is not really the best way to go in this scenario. Number 2. Thor gets hella pregnant. When did this happen? You guessed it, in the Ultimate Universe. Should just call this top 10 Marvel shocking moments of the Ultimate Universe. In the Ultimate Universe, however, Thor and Hela do not appear to be related, so at least there is that. But still, this is a shocking story for those who just happened to pick up a comic off the rack at the time. What happened was Thor wanted to leave Valhalla. In order to do so, he had to give Hela an heir, which was a term he agreed to. Yikes. Number 1. Return of Bucky Barnes. Bucky Barnes was one of the exceptions when it came to comic book character deaths. With most characters, there is always the expectation that the day will come where they will inevitably return, no matter how finite their death may have seemed or how many times the character has seemingly perished. However, Bucky's death was one of the few that was accepted as permanent. In truth, it had happened because Marvel wanted to move away from the idea of child sidekicks. Stan Lee especially was not a fan of that concept. In fact, you'll notice a good many of Marvel's heroes have been without kid sidekicks throughout Marvel history because of this. In 2005, Ed Brubaker made comic book history when he gave us the story of the Winter Soldier, resurrecting Bucky as a brainwashed assassin, bringing back one of the few characters who we expected to stay dead for good, alongside Marvel's Uncle Ben. But don't worry, Ed Brubaker did not bring back Uncle Ben. Uncle Ben's still pretty dead. What's more, Brubaker created an ending that could easily allow us to keep Winter Soldier or discard him based on how fans received this story. For Brubaker, the reasoning as well was that if Cap could have come back, then why couldn't Bucky? Also, we never saw him die on panel, so. Fortunately, this story that he told, while shocking, was well received, and so Bucky Barnes as the Winter Soldier returned for good. Woohoo!
Number 10. Superman and Wonder Woman's carnal embrace. Hopefully we all know who Frank Miller is, one of the most influential and popular creators in comics today, having wrote and illustrated Batman The Dark Knight Returns and The Dark Knight Strikes Again. Ring a bell? Okay, good. Well, Frank Miller was also responsible for one of DC's most disturbing moments when he portrayed Superman and Wonder Woman, how should I say this, getting it on? All things considered, we've probably seen worse, right? After all, DC had Superman and Wonder Woman dating as part of their New 52 continuity, so it should come as no surprise that the two would, you know. However, Frank Miller's over-the-top writing showed that this act was actually killing an untold number of people. How, you might ask? Well, in one specific case, as these two godlike beings fly up in the air and crash down to Earth during the act, we see earthquakes erupting all over the planet, hurricanes forming, tsunamis going nuts, and Hawaii was actually completely evacuated. All for the payoff of a super dumb pun, with Wonder Woman noting that the Earth moved. But sure, it's a cute joke, but how many people died due to the carelessness of these two? Now, I couldn't find the exact issue that this takes place in, but I know what happens in The Dark Knight Returns, so if you know it or can find the issue, post it in the comments below so we can all check it out for ourselves. Number 9. No More Watchmen. In the last issue of the original Watchmen limited series entitled A Strong and Loving World, we get a truly shocking reveal. Ozymandias was actually the bad guy all along. Turns out he was responsible for the deaths of thousands in New York, the death of the comedian, the accusations on Dr. Manhattan, and the framing of Moloch. Sure, that is shocking to say the least, but there's actually more, as it's what happens after that that's truly shocking. Now, don't get me wrong, Ozymandias' intentions were good. He did all that he could to prevent a nuclear war between the Soviet Union and the US. But it was still an injustice for Rorschach, and he wanted to expose Ozymandias. Setting out to do so, Rorschach encounters Dr. Manhattan and tells him exactly what happened. Dr. Manhattan tries to stop Rorschach from exposing Ozymandias, but Rorschach responded by saying that Manhattan had to kill him first in order to stop him. Now, in a shocking turn of events, Dr. Manhattan actually vaporized Rorschach and chose to believe in Ozymandias' cause instead. If you haven't already read this limited series, I highly recommend that you go back and check it out, starting with 1986's Watchmen, number 1. Number 8. Emerald Twilight. In the mid-90s, DC decided that it was finally time for the second and most well-known Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, to step down from the mantle so that it could be passed on to someone else. So how did DC decide to end the career of one of their most beloved heroes? Well, they couldn't just send him off quietly. Of course, they had to turn him into a villain of some sorts, undoing pretty much all of the good he's ever done. In the reign of Superman's storyline, which took place after the death of Superman's storyline, Hal's home of Coast City was completely destroyed by the villains Mongol and Cyborg Superman. As a result, the city was demolished and its 7 million citizens were killed. This turn of events made Hal completely lose it, and he believed that if he could steal all the main power batteries' energy, the source of the Green Lantern's rings, he could permanently rebuild Coast City. To do so, he killed all of the remaining Green Lantern Corps and the villain Sinestro, which led to him becoming the villain Parallax. To DC's credit though, they later redeemed Hal by having him sacrifice his life to restart the sun during the Final Night storyline, and revealing that his madness had been caused by being possessed by an entity made of fear. Hal would later go on to reform the Green Lantern Corps thanks to the expert guidance of Jeff Johns, but Emerald Twilight does still remain a black spot on DC's legacy. Check out this insane storyline for yourself in 1994's Green Lantern Volume 3, number 48 all the way to number 50.
Number 7. Kingpin learns of Daredevil's secret identity. This is an especially shocking story arc. Known as Born Again, in this story, Daredevil's secret identity is sold out by his ex-girlfriend Karen Page, who had become a heroin addict and, while desperate, sold his true identity for a hit. This information got passed around and eventually made its way back to Kingpin. It's never good when your arch-nemesis finds out your secret civilian identity, but for Matt Murdock, this was one of the worst things that would ever happen to him. Kingpin uses information to destroy Daredevil's life on pretty much every level, taking his money and his home, and even using it to destroy his relationship with his current girlfriend, and even destroy his costume. Jeez, guy had nothing left. Eventually, Wilson Fisk would get what was coming to him, but before that would happen, he would still make protecting and living in Hell's Kitchen a living hell for Matt Murdock. Number 6. Wolverine loses his adamantium. There have been quite a few shocking moments that have come to us from 90s comics, but one of the most dramatic and also the weirdest thereafter was when Magneto stripped all the adamantium from Wolverine's skeleton, pulling it out of his body. This was insanely painful for Wolverine, but he managed to survive the forced debonding process. However, it left him somewhat changed, and he almost died during the process. Wolverine became more animalistic and also lost his nose for some reason. Wolverine would remain without his adamantium and sort of without his nose for almost 8 years, which is also pretty crazy to think about, especially when it's considered such an iconic part of Wolverine's power set. Not his nose, his adamantium. Although he does have superhuman senses, so I guess his nose is part of his power set. Oh my goodness. Number 5. No More Mutants. Wanda is kind of the queen of shocking moments. Her magic is often unpredictable, resulting in many twists and turns to come about in the comics. But aside from its unpredictability, it's also very powerful, meaning that when Wanda does manage to get her magic right, it still usually gives us very shocking results. That was the case when Wanda had a psychotic break and created an alternate reality which began to crack and crumble as those supers within it began to see it for what it was. A fake reality, created and shaped by Wanda herself, a sham. Frustrated with her father Magneto's obsession to fight for mutant kind, she then altered reality once more as everyone seemed to be coming for her, speaking the words, "No more mutants" in the House of M series. This day, November 2nd, would become known as M Day in the Marvel Universe, the day when millions of mutants lost their powers, and we still see the consequences for many characters involved in the comics even today, almost 15 years later. Pretty crazy considering how many events get retconned out of existence almost. Number 4. Carnage becomes a hero? During the events of Axis, everyone had their alignments reversed when Wanda's magic went haywire like it usually does. Chaos magic? Nah, what you gonna do? Carnage as such became a hero, referring to himself as your friendly neighborhood Carnage, and attempting to fight for good like his usual nemesis, Spider-Man. The disturbing thing about his alignment reversal was that it didn't make Cletus Cassidy any less of a murdering psychopath. He still had those urges and had to fight to overcome them. Surprisingly, however, he behaved heroically enough that he was compelled to sacrifice himself in order to save the population of New York when the evil X-Men planted a gene bomb that would kill everyone in the city who wasn't a mutant. Pretty impressive. And he died, and then of course he came back because, well, it's still a comic book. How many times has Carnage lost his legs? That's some trivia for people. Answer me in the comments. How many times? Number 3. Spider-Man reveals his identity. Spider-Man did this as part of the Civil War story arc in order to help motivate other supers to do so and to support his friend and in a way mentor Tony Stark, who at the time was on the side of being for the Superhuman Registration Act, believing being against it would only lead to an all-out war with the government and be worse for supers later on. This was one of the most memorable and shocking moments of that event, outside of, Tony and Cap full on fighting one another and going to all-out war. Spider-Man revealed his secret identity to the world during a press conference, prompting his boss at the Daily Bugle, J.J. Jameson, who had always considered Spider-Man a menace and an enemy, to promptly fire him. His unmasking also gave Iron Man and his supporters the fuel they needed to build concentration camps in the negative zone for non-registered super folks. Yeah. Pretty controversial move there. Spider-Man would eventually get his secret identity back during another shocking and controversial, for different reasons, story, One More Day. But that's a tale for another list. Maybe a part 4. Number 2. Iron Man is working for Kang. Or really, Iron Man is working for Immortus. During the crossing, widely regarded as one of the most bizarre storylines from the 90s, it was revealed that Tony had become a villain and sleeper agent for Kang the Conqueror. In another attempt at a shocking twist, it would later be revealed that Kang was actually Immortus and that Immortus was actually Iron Lad, but this wouldn't be revealed until later. And let's be real, none of that was really that shocking to us. I don't think many people cared. Some of the costume redesigns that were part of the crossing were also equally shocking, just in terms of how 90s they were. Just check out Scarlet Witch's costume from this time. Everybody's gotta have trench coats. That's the 90s. Number 1. Magneto, you are not the father. During the events of Axis, we also learned that Wanda and Pietro were not actually the blood relatives of Magneto, and were not even mutants. This all came about when Scarlet Witch attempted to perform some blood magic on her family members. It worked on Pietro, but not on Magnus. Fans would later learn this was because Wanda and Pietro were not actually mutants' children. In fact, they weren't even mutants. The High Evolutionary had experimented on them when they were just babies, and had simply disguised them as mutants and returned them after he was finished with his experimentation. This is still definitely one of my most disliked retcons in comic book history. Since this has been revealed, Scarlet Witch has become even more reviled by the superhero and mutant community, being referred to as a pretender and despised by most mutants. I just feel really bad for Wanda. This woman cannot get a break in the comics. Can we just give Wanda a break? Can Wanda be cool? Could she be cool again?
Number 10. Maxwell Lord Infinite Crisis. In the pages of Countdown to Infinite Crisis, the Blue Beetle is left near bankruptcy after funds from his company were mysteriously stolen. His investigation into his missing fortune yields something much darker though, a conspiracy to wipe out the superhuman community orchestrated by the Justice League International's former manager, Maxwell Lord. Now, he had enjoyed his influence over the Justice League and the formation of the Justice League International in the wake of Crisis on Infinite Earths. He was a wealthy and powerful businessman and claimed to have learned nobility and compassion from his late father, Maxwell Lord III. All of this pointed to him as a very genuine figure out to help keep Earth safe, but I guess we were wrong. During the Invasion saga, Lord acquires the superpower of mind control, and things only get worse from there. The build-up to Infinite Crisis saw many shocking events occur in the DC universe, including Lord's brutal murder of Ted Kord, aka Blue Beetle II. Lord's betrayal continues to damage the League throughout Infinite Crisis, with Lord stealing Batman's metahuman satellite to hunt down every superhuman on Earth with an army of cyborgs at its disposal. Wonder Woman straight up just murders him though after he mind controls Superman into assaulting his fellow Leaguers. As a last laugh after death, footage of Wonder Woman snapping his neck leaks worldwide, causing her to be alienated from the rest of the League. Number 9. Flash out of time and end of the road. In a possible future, this iteration of the Flash is a much darker Barry Allen with 20 years in the future. This future Flash first appears in the Flash Annual Volume 4 Number 3 as a broken man. Reeling from the death of a close friend and fellow speedster Wally West, future Flash travels backwards through time on a crusade to murder all of the former enemies he deems responsible for West's death, hoping to somehow change the future. His actions only widen a tear in the Speed Force, however, and the once hero ultimately decides to use a present-day Barry Allen's energy to seal the rift. Proving his superiority in a one-on-one battle against the present-day Barry, the pair are soon interrupted by the arrival of Wally West himself. Able to take on both speedsters at once, Future Flash's actions caused the one thing he began his quest to stop: the death of Wally West. Barry killed numerous rogues along the way before learning the error of his ways with help from his past girlfriend Patty Spivot, and eventually gave his life to save the present-day Barry Allens. Number 8. Gambit Mutant Massacre. Deciding if Gambit deserves a spot on this list today was a bit tough because although he is a member of the X-Men, he's a notorious thief with a reputation for stealing the most impossible of objects. Not to mention all of, the other terrible stuff that he's done. Amanda, however, was able to convince me that he is still technically a hero, and that's why he's showing up here today. Although he wasn't technically a member of the team quite yet, I'm still counting his actions that led to the Mutant Massacre event as a betrayal towards the X-Men. Gambit aided the evil Mr. Sinister in his plans in exchange for having a piece of his brain removed to allow him to have better control over his powers. Gambit formed the Marauders, a group of superpowered mercenaries, and led them to the Morlock tunnels, resulting in the event Mutant Massacre. Gambit's sins were finally aired out though in the early 2000s, and all of it seems to be somewhat forgiven, but that being said, I still feel it's worth remembering that Gambit's first canonical act was betraying the X-Men.
Number 7. Nick Fury becomes a Watcher. Basically, the story here is that the villain known as Orb, working with a few other villains, was jealous of Uatu the Watcher and decided to shoot him and steal his eye so that he could have the power of a Watcher. However, when Nick Fury found out about this tragedy, he immediately went to investigate as he did not know who was behind the ordeal. The Watcher actually refused to tell Fury what he knew, as it was not really his role to do so, only to watch and observe, not to interfere, even when he himself had been interfered with. That is some respect right there. He's like, this is my job, that's it, even if I'm kind of bleeding and maybe dying. Because of this, Fury felt he had no choice and killed the Watcher and stole his other eye, which contained Uatu's memories, in order to try to figure out who was responsible for the previous theft and for attacking Uatu. Eventually, Fury managed to get the confession he sought and discovered the Orb was responsible. One of the other villains the Orb had been with at the time, Dr. Midas, returned to the Watcher's citadel in order to absorb even more power from Uatu's corpse. Fury overloaded him using the power of the eye that was in his possession. This resulted in an explosion that seemingly killed both Midas and Fury, but in the end, it was discovered that Fury had survived. As punishment for his sins, because all of this took place in the original Sin story, the Watchers turned him into Uatu's replacement, forcing him to be the chained observer of Earth known as the Unseen. Number 6. Civil War. Not the second one though, that one was much less of a shock, I think. But the first Civil War got people excited while also amazing them when it first came out. Captain America and Iron Man had always kind of been at odds, but they were also friends and colleagues who had worked side by side for years as part of the Avengers. The notion that these two would be declaring all-out war on the other was pretty huge, especially when it came to the politics of what was going on, where Stark was advocating for his Superhuman Registration Act, or the Superhuman Registration Act. Kinda became his later though. Which would demand more accountability for heroes and would basically make them all government agents. Iron Man believed this could help to prevent potential casualties during world-threatening situations and events. Cap, however, did not believe that superhumans needed to be restricted and stood for freedom of superhumans. In the end, Captain America looked at the damage the war had caused and decided to surrender, but was seemingly assassinated by a time-traveling bullet on his way to prison, which ends the war. I could explain more about the time-traveling bullet, but that would be a whole other video, really. Number 5. Death of the Ultimate Universe. So we all kind kinda saw this one coming, but it was still shocking. While the ultimate alternate universe of Earth 1610 was one that had a lot of weird problem areas, it also gave us a lot of great and inventive takes on characters and some really cool moments. So despite the fact that it had kind of been run into the ground, many fans were still left flabbergasted when the line was cancelled after years of existing and being considered relatively successful. Sure, we still gotta keep some of our favorite characters from 1610 like Miles Morales and the villainous Reed Richards known as the Maker, but it was still shocking to know that almost everything and everyone else from that universe was gone forever. Even heartbreaking for some. R.I.P. Ultimates. You live on in our dreams. Number 4. Spider-Woman revealed as Skrull Queen. Skrulls have been a known shapeshifting race in the comics since they were first introduced in Fantastic Four issue 2 in the 1960s, but that doesn't mean that their almost completely secret invasion of Earth didn't shock and surprise us. Secret Invasion was an event that made everyone question everything they knew. No one was to be trusted because you didn't know if who you were talking to or even thought you had known for years could secretly have been a Skrull. Needless to say, when it was finally revealed the Skrull Queen had actually been hiding disguised as accomplished Avenger and sometimes detective Jessica Drew, aka Spider-Woman, people were shocked. Even more surprising was the fact that Norman Osborn, of all people, was the one to take her out. Number 3. Gwen Stacy and Norman Osborn's ship. During the Sins Past story, it was revealed that Gwen Stacy had a secret and kinda creepy relationship with Norman Osborn. Ew. And that this relationship resulted in the birth of 2 twins. Osborn had sent Stacy to Paris to birth the 2 twins, and this all happened before, I believe, her relationship with Peter. After her death, the existence of her and Osborn's children remained unknown to Peter, but Osborn convinced the twins, whom he raised in secret, that Spider-Man was both their father and also responsible for their mother's death, turning them into his own minions and goblins. This whole story is pretty shocking and is very icky. Number 2. Captain America becomes Hydra Supreme. The Cosmic Cube became a sentient entity resembling a little girl known as Kobik. S.H.I.E.L.D. had hoped to use the shards that created her form to manipulate reality as they saw fit. Unfortunately, this plan did not work out for them. Red Skull managed to influence the girl into warping reality to turn Captain America into a long-time Hydra sleeper agent. And so we got the shocking story where it was revealed that all this time Cap had been working for the evil organization of Hydra. That one panel where Cap says "Hail Hydra"? Yeah, that was a real thing that happened. Cap would actually succeed in infiltrating and conquering the United States government, becoming the reigning Hydra Supreme, but would later be defeated by main continuity Captain America, who still lived within the Cosmic Cube. This version of Cap would return and defeat his alternate evil self. Whew. Thank goodness. Number 1. Miss Marvel's surprise pregnancy. I wish this was a shocking moment that I could forget, and yet I cannot. And I cannot also believe that someone greenlit this story. We learn in issue 197 of Avengers that Carol Danvers as Miss Marvel is pregnant. Not only that, but her pregnancy seems to be progressing along at an alarmingly quick rate. Carol is scared, but is reassured by Wanda, to whom she revealed her secret identity, that she is an Avenger, which means she has a group of friends who will stand by her no matter what. Unfortunately, what that ends up meaning is a group of friends who actually don't really seem to listen to her, celebrating the pregnancy and kind of shaming Carol somewhat for not being happier about it, despite the fact that Carol is terrified and has no earthly idea how this could have happened to her. It's later revealed that her baby, who grows up rapidly and introduces himself as Marcus, is also kind of the man who got her pregnant, or an extension of him anyways, who had to do so in order to use her body as a means of escaping limbo, but then realizes that his presence in the world is too dangerous. What a great plan you had. He ends up returning to limbo, but Carol for some reason decides to come with him so that he won't be alone. At no point do the Avengers really listen to Carol or check in with her or try to help her when she's obviously being manipulated by Marcus, who even confesses that he manipulated her to begin with. Thankfully, Chris Claremont at least wrote an Avengers annual a year later calling out how shockingly bad this story was. Thank you, Claremont.